Chapter 2041. This kind of messy concept was useless to Luo Fan, and he didn't even care about the concept itself. However, he was quite interested in how this concept was formed and how it could exist so stably in this power. With a slight thought, he directly cut his perception into the rock in the star wave and began to carefully comprehend the mystery of this sealing power. This kind of sealing power naturally had all kinds of defense to prevent others from probing it. However, this kind of defense was really useless to Luo Fan. He only needed a slight thought to instantly break through the defense against his probing, allowing the profundities of this power to be completely exposed to him. After that, Luo Fan didn't stop at all. He began to carefully explore all the details inside, looking for the root of every change, the whole process of every change, the details of every change, and even the reason for the change. All of these were so complicated that it was unimaginable. Even all the information of a world was not much more in comparison. Under such circumstances, it was obviously a huge project for Luo Fan to completely understand all of this. Even for him, when he arrived at the place he had set his eyes on a few days later, his gains were still meager. He had only obtained a rough understanding of the several hundred cultivation methods that had formed this power. And these hundreds of cultivation methods each corresponded to a trace of concept. These traces of concept would naturally appear when these cultivation methods were raised to the peak or even beyond the peak. And at this time, even if these traces of concept appeared, it would not completely integrate with the power cultivated by the cultivation method. Instead, after appearing, it would dissipate, and after dissipating, it would appear again, and so on and so forth. These hundreds of cultivation methods, every one of them was the same. There was no exception. In other words, if there were only these hundreds of cultivation methods, this power would not be able to take shape. At least, it was impossible for the mixed thoughts that existed within this power to appear stably in this power. In other words, even at this moment, Luo Fan still hadn't grasped the true mystery of this power. He couldn't fully understand how these messy ideas appeared in this power. It should be the combination of all the cultivation methods in the end. When all the power is combined, it will produce some kind of strange change. Only then can these heterogeneous ideas truly fuse with the power and become another source of this power. Luo Fan had a guess in his heart. There was naturally no need for him to form such complicated ideas. After all, he possessed an incomparably pure worldview that had been developed to an unbelievable level. He could even vaguely see the worldview of a true sage. However, compared to the concepts themselves, fusing the concepts into the power and turning the power into the body of the concepts, allowing the concepts to exist independently of him, was a method that was rather attractive to him. After all, with Luo Fan's current means, it was very simple to evolve the worldview of laws into dermic power of laws. It was also not difficult to use dermic power of laws to fight. It was also not a troublesome thing to directly add the worldview to the power of laws. However, he still couldn't turn the other powers into the body of the worldview of laws, so that a part of the worldview could be independent. This might not be too important, and it was not enough to delay his matters. However, after all, it would cause him to be unable to use the worldview of laws perfectly, and it might even affect his breakthrough again in the end. In this way, it would be fine if he didn't discover it. Once he did, how could he let go of this mystery? He had such a thought in his heart. Luo Fan didn't enter the world in front of him that looked like a small island. Instead, he sat cross-legged in the waves of stars outside this world and began to wholeheartedly comprehend the rock in his hand. Time passed in a flash. In the blink of an eye, several years had passed. After several years of comprehension, all the cultivation methods contained in the power were already in his heart. There are actually nearly 10 million cultivation methods hidden in it. It seems that the cultivators who can step into the second level of the Tao Master's Road are not simple. Looking at the rock in his hand, Luo Fan's mood was quite complicated. He originally planned to spend more than 10 days to do this, but he didn't expect to study it for several years. It was not until now that he had deduced all the tens of millions of cultivation methods. Just from a number of cultivation methods, it could be seen how legendary the situation of the owner of this rock was, and how much effort it took to condense such a power. It could be said that if his experiences were to be brought out, it would be a fascinating novel, without any flaws, however, for Luo Fan. Such a number was not too much pressure, even though there were tens of millions of cultivation methods. With just a thought, these tens of millions of cultivation methods suddenly collapsed in his mind. All the principles and mysteries within them began to clash, attract each other, and fuse with each other. All kinds of related mysteries were constantly refined by him in this process and gradually merged into one. With Luo Fan's current cultivation realm after passing the fourth tribulation, the mysteries of the second tribulation level were obviously not too much trouble for him. In just a few days, he had already obtained the final result. It was an unimaginably complex divine sense. There was no other use for this divine ability. The only use was to fuse one's concept into any kind of power, and then turn that power into the new carrier of the concept. From then on, it would become a power that no power without the profound mysteries of the concept could resist. It's really mysterious. Although it took a few years, it's still worth it. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. With this thought, his heart slightly moved. He raised his hand, and an extremely ordinary true fire of the sun appeared out of thin air in the void. This true fire of the sun did not come from anything else, but from a star wave. One must know that the star wave even contained the mysteries of primal chaos. It would be extremely easy to extract any kind of power from such an existence. An extremely common thing, like the true fire of the sun, would naturally not be a problem for it. After this true fire of the sun appeared, Luo Fan's heart moved, and his worldview began to tremble slightly. Then, wisps of ideas appeared out of thin air in his hands. These wisps of ideas were extremely pure and fiery ideas. The reason why this fiery idea appeared was because Luo Fan had forcibly copied it from the worldview of laws. It was itself a part of the worldview of laws. However, it did not involve more mysteries of the worldview of laws. In fact, the reason why such a fiery idea could appear was because he had seen the concept of chill in the water world. The fundamental reason was that he had seen the concept of chill in the water world. It was precisely because he had seen the concept of chill that he had just discovered that ideas could exist in such a form and did not need to rely on the worldview as a whole to exist. After these wisps of fiery ideas appeared, he controlled them without hesitation and began to change them according to an extremely complicated and mysterious method. During this process, these wisps of fiery ideas began to produce an inexplicable attraction force, directly targeting the true fire of the sun, causing the true fire of the sun to quickly move towards his palm according to an extremely complicated trajectory. It left behind an incomparably complicated and abstruse pattern in the void. In the end, after the true fire of the sun came to his palm, it began to quickly fuse with the wisps of fiery ideas. There was not much of this fiery idea, just a trace. It could even be said to be the smallest unit of the idea. After fusing with the true fire of the sun, the two simultaneously triggered a terrifying roar, and then they began to quickly fuse together. In the blink of an eye, the wisps of fiery ideas had already perfectly fused with the true fire of the sun. Following this fusion, the strength of the true fire of the sun did not change. However, the burning effect was already at least 10,000 times stronger than before. Moreover, it also added an inexplicable sense of absoluteness. Previously, when the true fire of the sun fell into Luo Fan's hands, it could not affect him at all. But now, after he added the wisps of fiery ideas, the true fire of the sun was already difficult for him to control. Holding in his hand, before it even came into contact with his palm, he could already feel waves of heat coming from the true fire of the sun, constantly engulfing his entire body. Just being close to it already had such an effect. If the true fire of the sun really came into contact with him, then even his body might be ignited, just like when he first encountered the chilling ideas. Even at this moment, the surrounding void seemed to be burning and began to distort. Faintly, there were even strange space-times being formed within the burning range of the true fire of the sun. Pushed by the true fire of the sun, it scattered outwards and quickly collapsed after leaving the true fire of the sun. It turned into sparks and disappeared without a trace. It was precisely because of the appearance and destruction of these space-times that the true fire of the sun continued to burn. Sparks constantly flashed in all directions. Just a wisp of ideas has such an effect. It seems that although this method of using ideas can't compare to Dharma power of laws and other wonderful uses, it is much stronger than Dharma power of laws in terms of destructive power. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. If compared to the ordinary world, this method of using ideas compared to pure Dharma power of laws was like comparing electricity-driven machinery to electricity. Electricity could be used to drive any electricity-driven machinery, and it could even be used to generate magnetic fields to achieve various goals that could only be achieved by using magnetic fields. It could be said that there were countless uses. However, from the perspective of destructive power, although pure electricity also had some destructive power, compared to powerful weapons driven by it, its destructive power might be far inferior. For example, the destructive power of space-based weapons driven by electricity was enough to destroy a planet, and ordinary electricity itself could not compare to it. Now, Luo Fan's law power was equivalent to turning his worldview into an ordinary electric current. Loading this concept onto other powers was equivalent to turning this worldview into a machine or a weapon. Although the latter was inferior to the former in terms of essence, in terms of combat, the latter might far surpass the former. Of course, this was only a possibility. It did not mean that any power that could be integrated with any concept would be stronger than the power of laws. As for what kind of power to use with what kind of concept, how much power should be combined with how many concepts should be used in order to achieve the greatest combat power and to display the power of that concept to the greatest level. This required a lot of time to research. Only by experimenting would they know. Luo Fan's experience and cultivation had already reached an incredible level, and at this time, he opened his mind. Countless inspirations kept popping up. For a moment, all sorts of concepts and combinations of powers appeared in his mind. If I can imitate the connate, inextinguishable spirit light and add the concept of immortality, then its power will definitely be close to the peak. It might even be close to the true, connate, inextinguishable spirit light. At this moment, Luo Fan thought to himself. Simulating the innate, inextinguishable spiritual aura had been Luo Fan's strongest offensive technique for a period of time. But ever since he had condensed the power of laws, this technique had been overshadowed by the power of laws. Unknowingly, it had fallen to a point where he had almost forgotten about it. Now, this kind of comprehension. However, he suddenly realized that perhaps the power of the innate, inextinguishable spirit light could be further developed. It could even surpass all attacks and become his strongest combat power. With this in mind, Luo Fan naturally would not let go of the opportunity to experiment. With a thought, he extracted the scorching concept from the sun's true fire in his hand. As that thought was taken away, the sun's true fire returned to its original state of not being a threat to him. With a slight tremble, it completely dissipated. After dispersing the sun's true fire, he no longer hesitated. Countless mysterious lights continuously condensed in his body and gushed out of his hand, gradually turning into a long river in front of him. There were countless spots of light flickering within, and it looked like a long river of stars hidden within. This was obviously his simulated, innate, inextinguishable spirit light. However, compared to the simulations he had made in the past, this simulated, innate, inextinguishable spirit light was not more similar to the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. On the contrary, it was even more different from the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Of course, this did not mean that he could not retreat, but that he had already added his own comprehension into it. Now, This simulated, innate, inextinguishable spirit light actually contained his comprehension of the world of laws. In other words, this could be said to be what he had expected. The appearance of the innate, inextinguishable spirit light formed with the world of laws as the foundation. In this way, the power of the simulated innate, inextinguishable spirit light might be a little weaker than before. However, it was many times easier for him to control it than before, and he could activate and control its power more freely than before. The combat power that could be controlled by this simulated, innate, inextinguishable spirit light would definitely be several times stronger than before. Of course, the foundation for all of this was to ignore the change in the power of the innate, inextinguishable spirit aura caused by the increase in his cultivation realm. If this change was to be added, the amount of calculation would be countless times more, and it was obviously not necessary at this time. Seeing this simulated, innate, inextinguishable spirit light appear in front of him, Luo Fan no longer hesitated. His heart moved slightly, and he began to condense traces of the concept of indestructibility between his hands according to the divine ability he had comprehended before. Indestructibility was Luo Fan's highest pursuit all along, so the concept of indestructibility naturally occupied a considerable proportion in the world of laws. Therefore, he did not have to worry about not being able to find the concept of indestructibility, nor did he have to worry about being unable to extract it. As Luo Fan moved, a stronger and stronger aura of indestructibility appeared in the palm of his right hand. This aura of indestructibility continued to grow stronger as time passed. It was originally just a trace, but it turned into wisps. In the end, it almost became a long dragon that continuously twisted and changed on his palm. Let's see how much it is for now. With this thought in mind, he stopped refining and pressed the long dragon towards the simulated, innate, inextinguishable spirit light. This pressing was not without technique. Instead, there were countless changes appearing in his hand in every instant. Although it was not long, it was so complicated that even a false sage would not be able to withstand the changes, and their soul would explode. This trajectory was tens of thousands of times more complicated than the trajectory of the scorching concept that he used to guide the true sun fire into his palm. The two could even be said to be like heaven and earth. The reason for this was because of the difference in power and, more importantly, the number of concepts fused. Don't forget that the scorching concept that was fused into the true sunfire was only a trace, but the concept now was like a long dragon. The difference was more than tens of thousands of times. Moreover, the simulated, innate, inextinguishable spirit light was indescribably different from the ordinary true sunfire. Previously, it was summoning power into the concept, but this time, it was pressing the concept into the power. How could the two of them use the same method? How could it be possible for them to use the same trajectory? Under the incomparably complicated trajectory, the concept of indestructibility smashed into the simulated, innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Chapter 2042. At this moment, the cultivators who were observing the star wave, waiting for the right time to enter the star wave, or passing by to visit the star wave, all noticed a sudden burst of light at a certain point in the star wave. Although the light only appeared for a brief moment and disappeared in the blink of an eye, it caused all the cultivators to be dumbfounded. One had to know that this was the star wave that was constantly wreaking havoc on the second level of the Tao Sovereign's path. This kind of existence had wandered around the Tao Sovereign's path since ancient times. Anything that stood in its way, whether it was the world or the cultivators, regardless of the level of the magic treasure or the level of the spell, would be devoured by it in the end. It couldn't be shaken at all. Why were there so many worlds in the star wave? Why were there so many treasures? It was said that they were all sucked in from the outside world, and it was this kind of star wave that actually had such a flash of light at this moment. What did this mean? It meant that there was either a super powerful treasure being born there. In an instant, many cultivators who didn't plan on entering the star wave couldn't help but use their own methods to enter the star wave and head towards the place where the light was. As for those cultivators who were waiting for the opportunity to enter the star wave, there was no need to mention them. Wasn't this telling them that the time had come? However, how could he hesitate? He immediately dove into it. In the blink of an eye, it was like countless streams flowing into the sea. All of them flowed into the star wave. This caused the originally lively scene around the star wave to become much quieter. And the source of all these changes was the simulated innate, inextinguishable spiritual light in front of Luo Fan at this time. The light that erupted from this simulated connate, eternal spirit light was extremely dazzling. Even when Luo Fan looked at this light, he felt like his eyes were about to be pierced. An indescribable aura of indestructibility came from the simulated connate, eternal spirit light and spread in all directions. Gradually, the surrounding star wave began to churn. Countless space-time was formed and countless kinds of power were naturally born. They began to fill space-time. They changed space-time or shattered space-time. As a result, more and more powerful ripples spread in all directions, causing the light emitted from the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light to become more and more powerful. An indescribable realization rose in Luo Fan's heart at this moment. This is already a half-step primordial origin spiritual treasure. At this moment, the light emitted by the simulated connate indestructible spiritual light became brighter and brighter. The two ends of the light began to bend under the influence of some indescribable mechanism, and before they knew it, they had already connected, forming an extremely large yet extremely small ring. It hung in front of Luo Fan, spinning slowly. The light emitted from it gradually turned from an endless explosion to a gentle illumination. In a trance, it seemed to have turned into an incomparably huge yet incomparably small sun. The countless space-time that had been created around it had been destroyed. At this moment, the endless powers seemed to have been subjected to an indescribable and terrifying attractive force. It began to frantically surge into the center of the ring, constantly colliding and fusing there. In the end, it turned into a vast, ever-changing space-time that was constantly collapsing and being rebuilt. I see. This is also a way for the world to be born in the star wave. Luo Fan looked at this scene and was enlightened once again. The space-time formed by the gathering and fusing of countless space-time fragments was still not a complete world. It could not exist in the star wave for a long time. However, as the ring continued to create space-time and fuse with it, one day, the space-time inside would turn into a complete world similar to any world that Luo Fan had experienced before. With regards to this, Luo Fan could naturally see through it immediately. In fact, he even vaguely began to speculate what this world would look like after it was formed, and what kind of inclination it would have. Of course, even he could not deduce the final outcome in such a heaven-defying manner. As the space-time continued to stack, the light emitted by the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light began to converge. Although it was still constantly shaking the star wave and creating space-time and energy, it eventually stopped spreading in all directions and was no longer like a sun like before. This was also the fundamental reason why the light disappeared in a flash from the outside of the star wave. Originally, Luo Fan planned to enter the small island-like world not far away, but he changed his mind now. Although that world was mysterious and might contain a way for him to directly communicate with the depths of the star wave and the mysterious chaos, it could not compare to the world that was born through his own hands. The birth of heaven and earth contained supreme mysteries, and this would not change no matter what level one reached. If one felt that there was something wrong with this sentence, it was because the level of the world that was born was not high enough, or the depth of comprehension was not deep enough. And any world that existed in the star wave was definitely not of a low level. If Luo Fan could not comprehend any supreme mysteries from it, it meant that he had not comprehended enough. Now that this world was being born, it was a great opportunity for him. In particular, this world could only be formed under the protection of the half-step primordial origin spirit treasure that simulated the inextinguishable innate spirit light. It could even be called a part of the magic treasure that he had created. For him, it gave him a unique advantage. Under such circumstances, if he did not choose this world, which world should he choose? Luo Fan's heart stirred slightly. He lifted his foot and took a light step forward. His figure had already stepped into the space-time inside the ring. At this moment, the space-time was constantly colliding and fusing with each other. At every moment, there were tens of thousands of cruelties being produced within it. Living beings were born and destroyed, but the space-time was still thriving at this moment. It seemed that it could exist forever and become the foundation of a great world, but in the next moment, it would completely collapse under the impact of a certain space-time. At this moment, it was still the ruins of a broken world, but in the next moment, it would completely melt because of a certain space-time turning into a complete space-time. It made people feel that it could extend into a great world. There were all sorts of changes. If an ordinary cultivator was here, he would not even know how he died. However, Luo Fan was not affected in the slightest. He was like a phantom. No matter how the surrounding space-time changed, whether it was destroyed, collapsed, or fused, he was not affected at all. His expression did not change at all at this moment. From the outside, the ring and the space-time inside looked like a new star in the void. It was just that its light was countless times dimmer than the other stars. Of course, that was the immortal aura that the ring emitted. It was much denser than the messy aura that emitted from the other stars. This dense aura of indestructibility caused the star to be extremely conspicuous, even though it was extremely dim. Any cultivator who stepped into the star wave would be able to see its existence. As a result, 20% to 30% of the cultivators began to move towards the ring from all directions. Compared to Luo Fan, who could cover himself with a worldview of laws and directly see through the truth of the star wave, those in all directions obviously could not come here so easily. Cultivators from all directions obviously could not come here so easily. Among them, even the closest cultivators would need at least tens of thousands of years to come here due to the limitations of their senses. Not to mention those who were further away, they might even need hundreds of millions of years to arrive. Luo Fan did not care about anything that happened in the outside world at all. At this moment, he was only experiencing the various changes that were occurring in the countless space-time. He was comprehending the mysteries of the world, the principles of the world, and even the principles of the star wave that existed in the changes. Although there were various repetitions, the entire process of change ultimately pointed to fusion, to the final result of the fusion of all space-time into a world. So that's how it is. Several years later, Luo Fan suddenly had a flash of inspiration and experienced a wonderful essence. As he experienced the true essence, his perspective changed dramatically. The countless complicated changes in space-time in his eyes completely disappeared at this moment. Instead, streams of air constantly flowed into the ring from all directions. At the same time, there were also traces of strange existences continuously joining the air currents in the ring, causing the characteristics of the air currents to gradually change as they gathered. The way they gathered also gradually changed. Those air currents were the origin of the world. As for that concept, it was the indestructible concept that existed within the ring. Of course, this concept seemed to flow out from the ring, but in fact, the integration of this concept into the air currents did not cause the loss of the immortal concept in the ring. The entire process was more like a copy than an outflow. Star wave, so that's how it is. No wonder there is a concept of chill, and there are cultivators who can comprehend the existence of concepts from the side. Seeing this scene, he already had the answer to all the doubts he had left in his heart in the past. Why did the world with the blood tribulation take such a form? Why did the accumulation of all kinds of karma trigger the blood tribulation and not something else? It was clearly because the concept of the blood tribulation had been integrated into the world when it was born. And why did the water world have an ice age? It was because the concept of chill had been integrated into it from the very beginning. Boldly extrapolating, the endless world within the star wave might have been born because of the various concepts that were integrated into the world when it was formed. Of course, this was only his speculation for now. As for whether it was true or not, he could only confirm it after seeing more worlds. In this way, he already had a rough guess as to why the world in front of him would have that characteristic after it was formed. Immortality should be a characteristic of this world. Perhaps it's a certain characteristic of this world's tribulation. As he thought this, his eyes revealed even more intense anticipation. What would a world that was integrated with the concept of indestructibility look like? What kind of tribulation would it be that used indestructibility as a tribulation? He almost couldn't help but want to see it. Unfortunately, no matter how much he looked forward to it or how much he resisted, the birth of this world would not change because of his mood. The conflict and fusion of the void continued unhurriedly. According to his calculations, it would take at least 1,000 years for it to truly take shape. As for waiting for the tribulation to occur, it would probably take even longer without the great tribulation urging him from behind. Luo Fan's patience was obviously extremely ample. It was only 1,000 years. This was really not a problem for him. At this moment, his expression did not change at all. He just quietly felt the changes in the ring and the many details of the world formation. Time passed quickly. 1,000 years passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, Luo Fan suddenly came to his senses. He only heard an earth-shattering thunderclap. Endless tremors instantly swept through his body, sweeping towards the ring and the star waves outside the ring. Then, everything calmed down. The collision and fusion of time and space that had been going on for the past 1,000 years had completely calmed down. Even the light emitted by the ring had completely disappeared at this moment. The world has opened. In an instant, Luo Fan understood what was going on. An inexplicable premonition made him raise his hand and beckon gently. With this move, the ring that was formed by imitating the inextinguishable spirit light that enveloped this part of the world trembled slightly. It had already left the world, and as it slowly shrank, it gradually fell into his hand and turned into a small ring lying there quietly. At this moment, that part of the world didn't even shake, let alone collapse. When he looked at that part of the world again, it looked like a long river that had no beginning and no end. It appeared from the void and flowed into the void. And in that long river, countless worlds gathered and turned into stars arranged in it. This was the world formed by the gathering of countless space-time. It was a world made up of numerous worlds. Such a world was actually not rare in the star waves, but to reach such a limit and increase the number of worlds to such a level was something that had never been seen before. Perhaps it was because the process of the creation of this part of the world was completely witnessed by Luo Fan. At this moment, he could clearly feel an indestructible aura in this world. Although it had just been born, there was a leisurely and ancient feeling everywhere. It was as if this part of the world had existed since ancient times, but it had not shown itself all this time. Now, it had appeared for some reason. In fact, when he took a closer look, he could even see that there were still countless historical relics left in the many worlds in this world. It was as if countless civilizations had appeared in those countless worlds and were destroyed in those countless worlds. All kinds of indescribable insights continuously emerged in Luo Fan's heart at this moment, and they gradually transformed into resources for the growth of his worldview, causing his worldview to begin to undergo various subtle changes. Among them, the most obvious was that the indestructible concept that had originally integrated into the entire worldview had been slightly strengthened, and the proportion of the entire worldview seemed to have slightly increased. And such a change made the figure that existed in his life origin, which was a materialization of the worldview, vaguely seem to have a hint of indestructible charm. Feeling the various changes that had taken place in his body, Luo Fan faintly understood in his heart. In the end, the concept still needs to be taken out and applied in order to have more understanding. Building a cart behind closed doors is ultimately still lacking. This concept of building a cart behind closed doors was naturally perfecting one's concept, but not putting it into reality, not using it in reality, not using it in battle, not supporting, not creating a world, not destroying a world, not creating, not destroying. The worldview was the key to Luo Fan's cultivation. All along, he had only been working hard to perfect this worldview, working hard to transform this worldview, and working hard to find impurities in this worldview that did not match the true sage worldview. It was not until this time that he extracted a certain concept from this worldview and allowed it to evolve to observe the final results it could cause. Before this, he did not think that this would be beneficial to his own worldview. At most, he just wanted to see the complete process of the evolution of the world. However, he did not expect that this process would allow him to see the various potentials that were originally contained in the concept and discover all kinds of mysteries that he had not discovered before. It was only at this time that he realized that his previous cultivation of the worldview was simply half completed. It was like a student who only kept memorizing science formulas, but never used them to solve real or written problems. However, although he understood where this flaw was, Luo Fan could not start to put it into practice for a while. After all, almost all concepts existed in the worldview of the worldview, and it was definitely all-encompassing. Or, to be more specific, it was all-encompassing. Chapter 2043. But maybe there's another way that can save a lot of time. Suddenly, Luo Fan's heart trembled, and an inexplicable inspiration emerged in his heart. If he wanted to extract the concept from the world of laws and give them some kind of power to evolve, it would naturally take enough time to make anyone despair. However, if he looked at it from another perspective and did not do it alternately, but at the same time, then the time would naturally be greatly reduced. In fact, if this was done to the limit and the entire world of laws as a whole was given the corresponding energy, wouldn't he be able to complete the whole process of learning and putting it to use in one go? Thinking of this, Luo Fan could not help but feel an inexplicable excitement in his heart. Giving the entire world of laws corresponding power and letting these powers evolve naturally was somewhat similar to directly developing a world according to the world of laws, but the changes were more subtle and more complicated. The final result was definitely not something that an ordinary world of laws could compare with. Thinking of this, the world formed by the concept of immortality in front of him had a different meaning to him. There are countless worlds in this world, and it itself is integrated with the concept of immortality. Perhaps I can spread the entire world of laws to all the worlds in this world. He turned to look at the endless world in front of him with an eager look in his eyes. The world itself, formed by the concept of immortality, would definitely have a strong effect of immortality. Such an existence's ability to withstand changes and various impacts would definitely be countless times stronger than an ordinary world. In this way, even if the world of laws that were scattered into the endless world would erupt with incredible impacts, there is a greater possibility that this world would remain intact. Thinking of this, Luo Fan no longer hesitated. With a slight thought, his perception began to integrate with this world. He carefully sensed the endless world in this world. It was only because this world was born because of his concept of indestructibility that he was able to achieve this. If it were any other world that existed in the star wave, he would have to completely refine the entire world. Otherwise, it would be impossible to achieve this step. On the other hand, the amount of time and energy needed to completely refine a world would definitely be terrifying to the point of causing one to feel despair. Even if Luo Fan could spend hundreds of millions of years to achieve this, the gains would not make up for the losses in the end. Although the countless worlds in this world were born from the concept of indestructibility bestowed by Luo Fan, every single world was different from the others. Every single world had its own unique characteristics. In this way, these worlds naturally had different ways of adapting. Some worlds were suited to the concept of chill. Some were suited to the concept of growth. Some were suited to the concept of firmness. Some were suited to the concept of size. Some were suited to the concept of length. There were countless of these, and it was even to the extent that it could be said to have everything. However, there was still a big gap between the number of these worlds and the number of concepts contained in Luo Fan's own worldview. However, that was only a small problem at a time, when Luo Fan had a lot of special privileges in this world. It was just a thought. The entire world began to seem as if all sorts of powers were colliding in the void of this world. Amidst these collisions, the world naturally evolved. From a distance, the entire world looked brighter and brighter, and the stars became denser and denser. In just a short 100 years, the number of worlds in this world had been adjusted by him to be equal to the concept in his worldview. At this moment, from the outside, the entire world seemed to have transformed into a bright moon. Originally, it was just a starry world. Now, it was almost connected and completely filled the entire world. It completely covered up the entire void within it. Of course, this was only because the three-dimensional world had been transformed into a flat surface from the outside. In fact, there was still an endless void within this world. Although those worlds were densely packed in this world, it was not enough to completely cover the void. In this case, it's just right. Fortunately, this side of the world has the concept of immortality. Otherwise, this kind of growth would have been enough to make it collapse. Luo Fan looked at the changes in this side of the world, and such thoughts flashed in his mind. Having reached this step, he no longer hesitated. With a thought, his worldview directly appeared on the surface of his body. It was like a suit of armor, covering his entire body. The specks of light on the surface continued to twinkle and swim. All sorts of indescribable mysteries of cultivation were revealed as these specks of light swam, making him look holy and incredible. Immediately afterward, countless streams of light rushed out from the light spots on this worldview like meteors, brazenly rushing towards the endless world within this world. In the blink of an eye, there were countless streams of light flashing in this world. It was like a spider web directly connecting Luo Fan to the endless world in this world. At every moment, an unknown number of streams of light shot out from the worldview on the surface of Luo Fan's body, rushing towards an unknown number of worlds within the endless world. This speed was so fast that ordinary cultivators simply couldn't react to it. However, it was at this speed that it took nearly 1,000 years to completely sweep through every concept in the worldview. In other words, it was just now that it had swept through every world within this world. From this, it could be seen how vast the concepts in Luo Fan's worldview were, and how many worlds there were in this world. When all the streams of light rushed into the countless worlds within this eternal world, further changes began to take place. Although it had been 1,000 years since the streams of light rushed out from the surface of Luo Fan's body until now, it had still been 1,000 years. But in fact, until now, there still wasn't a single stream of light that had truly, completely integrated with a world. In other words, from 1,000 years ago until now, there wasn't a single concept that had truly integrated with a world. The reason for this was because Luo Fan knew that once they fused, once they integrated, the entire integration process would definitely reveal endless mysteries, and he would definitely be completely immersed in it. In the end, it would influence him to lead the concept to leave the worldview and choose the corresponding world. Only at this time, when he no longer had to worry about being disturbed and could wholeheartedly comprehend the various mysteries within, could he proceed to the next step. Let's begin. Seeing that every world in this world was enveloped in an inexplicable light, faintly revealing all sorts of incomparably familiar feelings. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Then he slowly raised his hand and slowly clenched his fist. In the end, he suddenly clenched his fist. Bang! An indescribably terrifying fluctuation instantly erupted from his fist, and in the blink of an eye, it had already swept through the endless worlds within this world. As the boundless world were swept by, the boundless consciousness that had already wrapped around those worlds began to violently change. It frantically devoured the boundless energy within those worlds, producing more and more powerful might. It began to cause all sorts of changes to those worlds, big or small. Integrating concepts into a world was not a gentle process. If one wanted to integrate concepts into a certain kind of power, it was a simple process, but in this world, there was more than just one kind of existence. Just integrating concepts into a certain kind of power was nothing more than turning the concepts into nutrients for this world. For Luo Fan, although the actual effect of comprehending these concepts was somewhat beneficial, it was still limited. If one wanted to truly integrate these concepts into a world, one naturally needed to integrate them in all aspects. Make everything in this entire world contain these concepts. To achieve this, one had to do what Luo Fan was currently doing. Very soon, the concepts that were devouring energy within the worlds released more and more powerful might. Finally, under the impact of the fusion of concepts, those worlds began to collapse one by one. One by one, the worlds lost their original space-time structure at an extremely fast speed, losing their original material and energy structure, everything. They were all devoured by the power of the fusion of concepts. The entire world, at an extremely fast speed, it turned into waves of extremely complicated energy that contained concepts. Such a process, in fact, it was equivalent to destroying the world. If it wasn't for the fact that this world itself contained the concept of immortality, and that this concept came from Luo Fan himself, his actions alone would have been enough for this world to regard him as the enemy of the world, and would rather perish together with him in order to kill him. Even so, this world had already begun to shake continuously. The light released by this world also began to rapidly dim, and it vaguely felt like it was about to be extinguished. However, Luo Fan did not care about all of this. At this moment, he'd completely fused his senses with the entire world, and he'd fused with the countless strands of energy that had fused with his will in this world. In this state, even if something destroyed the world, he would not be able to react, let alone others. Luo Fan did not care about how the fusion of concepts would evolve into a new world. At most, he would give the world an order to stimulate these powers to evolve into a new world. It was not difficult for him to completely control the evolution of these powers and make them evolve into a new world. However, if that was the case, why would he do all of this? Why would he waste time to fuse concepts with these powers? Didn't he do all this for the sake of seeing how these concepts were produced and what sort of profundities and might they revealed? If all of these changes were under his control, how could there be anything that he had not comprehended? There were simply too many concepts, and there was too much power. Even with Luo Fan's realm in mind, it was not easy for him to completely grasp and comprehend everything. At this moment, all of his mind and senses had been pulled in by these energies. Even his mind felt bloated, as if his mind would explode if he were to add more information to it. At this moment, the cultivators outside the star wave were dumbfounded again. The strange bright spot that they had seen before had appeared again. Moreover, this time, the bright spot was not as fleeting as it had been before. Instead, it was like a real star existing in the star wave for a long time. It felt as if it could exist forever. If that was all, it would be secondary. Although they were shocked, they were not dumbfounded. After all, although it was rare for a new world to be born in the star wave, it was not as if it had never appeared before. Although the appearance of this star-like light was strange, it at most made them feel that a new world had appeared in the star wave. What really stunned the cultivators outside the star wave was that the bright spot only stabilized for a short while before it began to gradually expand. In just a few days, it had expanded from a small dot to the size of a fist. It had even overshadowed the starlight that existed in the star wave, or rather, all the light that was emitted from the world. Moreover, at this stage, the expansion of the light still did not stop. Instead, it continued to strengthen and expand. Finally, after a month, it had expanded to the size of a huge disk. It appeared on the surface of the star wave, and the light that it emitted even made the stars that originally existed in the surroundings completely disappear. Even the cultivators outside the star wave could faintly feel the endless aura contained within it. I can feel it. There are mysteries that I need inside. A cultivator murmured in a daze. I feel that if I enter it, I will definitely be able to obtain the answer to the question that has troubled me for hundreds of millions of years. Another cultivator's face was filled with excitement. There are treasures that I need inside. Another cultivator said greedily. Fellow Taoists, I will go first. There was even a cultivator who directly said this and took the lead, charging straight towards the star wave. His action was like a fuse that detonated a bomb. In an instant, the many cultivators outside the star wave became fanatical and began to madly charge towards the star wave. As mentioned before, the front of the star wave had an endless and terrifying impact. Almost none of the cultivators on the second level of the Tao Sovereign's path could withstand its power and wanted to step into the star wave. The only way to do so was to go around the side and the back. But at this moment, all the cultivators rushed towards the star wave without a care. They did not care about the endless impact contained within and did not care whether they could withstand it or not. They directly rushed in and whether they could survive. Of course, there was an incomparably fanatical desire to be the first to step into the constantly expanding bright spot that had gradually turned into a sun-like bright spot to search for the various things they needed. More importantly, it was because the aura emitted by the sun-like bright spot had directly passed through the star wave. This kind of aura was nothing to ordinary creatures or even ordinary cultivators. Whether it had any meaning to them or not, it only depended on whether they had a deep understanding of that thing. However, for these powerful cultivators who could cultivate on the second level of the Tao Sovereign's path, the existence of this aura was like a passage, a bridge. It was enough to allow them to bypass 90% of the terror of the star wave and directly arrive at the source of the aura. In other words, it was the place where the heaven and earth that was already like the sun was located. Of course, this did not mean that there was no danger. The perception of that aura, the use of that aura, the understanding of the characteristics of the star wave, their own cultivation realm, all of these were enough to affect the final outcome of their actions. Once there was a mistake, it would be a disaster for these cultivators. If everything was taken into account, even if this aura was used as a passage and a bridge, the degree of danger from rushing in from the front was still several times higher than from the back or the side. Normally speaking, if it was not attractive enough, those cultivators would naturally not choose this method. However, it was obvious that this was not a normal situation. The temptation of that world was too great for them, so great that they were willing to take risks that were several times more dangerous than before to step into that world as quickly as possible. Along the way, some cultivators recognized that the location of that world was the place where there had been an abnormality thousands of years ago. For a moment, they even felt a sense of schadenfreude in their hearts. Perhaps I will reach that world faster than them. Those cultivators who had stepped into the star wave to head to that world had entered from other safe places. In this way, no matter how lucky they were, it would still take them tens of thousands of years to reach that world. In comparison, although these cultivators were late by thousands of years, with the guidance of that aura, although it was more dangerous, their speed would be faster. They might only need a few years to reach that world. This speed was very likely to be faster than those cultivators from thousands of years ago. There were more than 30,000 cultivators who had truly set off to head to that sun-like world. In the end, there were only about 10,000 cultivators who had truly reached the inside of the star wave with the help of that aura. Chapter 2044. When the cultivators arrived at the place where the light was shining, they saw a vast world in front of them. Compared to the stars that could be seen in the distance, the other worlds were like the sun and ants. They were not on the same level at all. What a magnificent world! For such a world to be born in the star wave, it seems that there will be a huge change this time. A cultivator said with a sigh. Hearing this, many cultivators chimed in. Where there were people, there would be Jianghu, and there would be all kinds of strange legends. Although almost all the cultivators on the second level of the Tao Sovereign Path were extremely powerful, intelligent, and resolute existences, there were also many legendary existences. Among the many legends, there was a legend about the star wave. According to the legend, every few years, the star wave would undergo an abnormally huge change. This kind of huge change could cause endless disasters, but it could also bring endless opportunities. It was said that the strongest disaster could even directly wipe out the entire second level of the Tao's sovereign path, wiping out the countless cultivators on the second level. As for the opportunity, it was said that it could send tens of millions of cultivators to the third level of the Tao's sovereign path at once. Ordinary cultivators thought that this kind of legend was just a rumor, and they even thought that it was just a pastime of bored cultivators. Not many people believed it. However, there were also those who didn't believe it. Naturally, there were also those who did. In fact, there were quite a lot of cultivators who believed it. After all, this was the second level of the Tao's sovereign path, so it was not surprising if there were incredible things. The star wave had existed since ancient times. It was an existence that constantly wiped out the entire second level of the Tao sovereign path. It was not surprising if there was something special about such an existence. And the cultivators here. There were many who believed in this legend. The cultivators who believed in the legend were all excited and afraid. Naturally, they were excited because there might be a great opportunity. They who had been stuck on the second level of the Tao sovereign path for hundreds of millions of years would have a chance to step into the third level of the Tao sovereign path. As for what they were afraid of, it was naturally because of the extremely powerful tribulation that might exist within it. It was enough to wipe out all the cultivators here, causing their bodies and Tao to vanish and their souls to scatter. I think I should hide in the Tao Master's prison for a while. A cultivator suddenly spoke. His words caused many cultivators to look at him with disdain. Some cultivators were even tempted by his words. The Tao Master's prison was a place that no cultivator was willing to go to, because it meant that he would be imprisoned for an unknown amount of time before he could escape, and he might not even be able to escape forever. However, at the same time, the Tao Master's prison was also a place of refuge. There was no way to know how long he would be imprisoned and tortured in the Tao Master's prison if he made any mistakes. However, for the cultivators who were well prepared and had a deep understanding of the Tao Master's path, it was easy for them to adjust the severity of their mistakes to control the time they were imprisoned in the Tao Master's prison. In other words, it was not difficult for them to use the Tao Master's prison as a refuge. The reason why the cultivators suggested this was because he had suddenly thought of the legend and was worried that the terrifying tribulation in the legend would happen. Someone actually believes in such nonsense. I really don't know how he managed to cultivate to this stage. A cultivator said coldly. He turned around and charged towards the incomparably vast world in front of him. This world was incomparably huge, and it emitted countless mysterious and wondrous auras. This kind of aura had a great attraction to all the cultivators here. All of them could feel that there was something in this world that they were looking forward to. Under such circumstances, any existence that did not care about the legend would naturally choose to step into it immediately. Even if there might be shocking dangers within, they would still do so. That's right. We've already come this far. How can we give up on this opportunity just because of a legend that we don't know if is true or false? A cultivator laughed loudly. He followed the cultivator and charged into the world that was like a huge sun in front of him. Following that, more and more cultivators chuckled. Some were laughing, some were encouraging themselves, and some were looking down on others. All of them were rushing into that world one after another. However, this world itself didn't have any means of isolation, so it didn't stop the cultivators from the outside world from entering. It accepted them without reservation. Such a situation was extremely rare in the star wave. Generally speaking, the world in the star wave would not have too many strict restrictions on the cultivators who could enter, but cultivators at certain levels would inevitably encounter more or less obstacles when they stepped into it, and there would also be more or less repulsive effects on them. As for the worlds that were occupied by the cultivators on the path to becoming a Tao Master, there is no need to even mention that they would be met with great malice and a strong warning if they even approached it. A world that did not care about other cultivators entering, and even welcomed other cultivators to enter, had almost never been seen in the star wave. If this was the case for one cultivator, then it could be said that the cultivator was compatible with the nature of the world and would receive great treatment from the world. However, if all the cultivators were like this, then the situation could not be explained by preferential treatment at all. The number of nearly 10,000 cultivators was not a small number, but compared to the entire world, it was still a drop in the ocean. There were 4,000 to 5,000 cultivators who entered one after another, but after they entered the world, no two of them could see each other. At most, they could only rely on their super strong sensing ability to faintly sense the existence of other cultivators in certain places. From this, it could be seen how vast this world was. Every cultivator who entered the world could not help but feel an indescribable shock after discovering the scale of the world, and their hearts were filled with an indescribable anticipation. This world was even vaster than their own world by countless times. How many treasures were there in it? How many mysteries were worth pursuing? It was really too much to look forward to. Although many cultivators had previously said that they would give up the opportunity to enter this world, or that they would use the method of entering the Tao Master's prison to avoid the upcoming terrifying tribulations. But those were just words. In the end, all the cultivators still threw themselves into this world, of course. After all, they were hesitant, so there was a gap of 100 years between the last cultivators who entered this world and the first cultivators who entered this world. After those cultivators entered this world, no matter how close they were to each other, they would eventually be scattered across the entire world. And what appeared in front of them was not the normal world where the sky was round and the earth was square. Instead, it was a boundless void, and there were endless worlds that dotted the void. Those worlds were scattered throughout the void. They occupied various spots in the void. Some were crucial, some were meaningless, and they emitted a faint light. When combined together, the entire world became extremely bright, and it even faintly dazzled the eyes. The places where those cultivators appeared usually had a world around them. These worlds emitted an aura that resonated with the cultivators, and any cultivator who sensed it could not help but feel a strong sense of joy. Those who were impulsive directly entered the world and began to search for the things that resonated with them. Even those who were cautious also entered the world after studying it for a period of time, and so on and so forth. After the tens of thousands of cultivators entered, they quickly disappeared without a trace amid bursts of ripples. It was as if they had been completely devoured by those worlds. This world completely returned to its original appearance, still emitting a strong light. It was still incomparably dazzling outside of the star waves, and its size was still constantly increasing. This world was naturally the world that Luo Fan had formed after fusing with the concept of indestructibility. At this time, Luo Fan's body was already floating in the center of this world, in the center of the endless chi cycle. However, because he was incomparably close to this world, he was hidden by this world. So even though he was in such an easy place to find, no cultivator was able to discover his existence. As a result, no cultivator was able to discover his existence, even though he was in such an easy spot to find. This world seemed to have been formed naturally by the star waves, and there were no signs of human activity at all. This world seemed to have been formed naturally by the star waves, and there were no signs of human activity at all. There was also no trace of the existence of a ruler. It was precisely because of this that they could enter those worlds with such ease. As the star waves advanced, more and more cultivators discovered this world that was like a sun in the star waves, and more cultivators also sensed the existence of the aura that was emitted from the world that resonated with them. Under such circumstances, naturally, more and more cultivators followed this aura and entered the star wave, heading towards this world. Finally, they entered the world, and then entered a world that was compatible with them. At the same time, from all over the star waves, there were many other cultivators who sensed the changes in this world. They gradually rushed over from all directions and also entered the world within it. In this way, this world seemed to gradually become the center of the star waves, and it became the final goal of the cultivators who stepped into the star waves. 1,000 years passed in a flash. Unknowingly, the number of cultivators who had entered this world formed by the concept of indestructibility had already exceeded 1,000,000. This number was definitely enough to shock anyone. After all, this was the second level of the Tao Master's path. Normally, if there were so many cultivators here, there would be people who would doubt the existence of so many cultivators. But now, in just a short span of 1,000 years, there had already been over 1 million cultivators gathered here. This was enough to show the wonders of this world, and also the mysteries of the second level of the Tao Master's path. And even if there were over 1 million cultivators in this world, no two cultivators would step into the same world at the same time. Compared to the countless trillions of worlds, 1 million cultivators was really too insignificant. Even if this number was increased by 1,000, 10,000, or even 100 million times. The probability of two cultivators entering the same world at the same time was so small that it could almost be regarded as non-existent. After the cultivators entered, those worlds also began to change. There were all kinds of changes, and there were different manifestations according to the situation of different worlds. But in the end, there could only be one reason for all these strange changes, and that was the evolution of the entire world was even more explosive, and all kinds of changes became faster and more intense. This world was almost beyond the limit of what could be described by numbers, and each of them was entrusted with the concept of Luo Fan's worldview. The endless worlds represented the endless concepts within them. After these worlds took shape, because of the integration of those concepts, they became a little unbalanced, and it was difficult for them to exist in an incomparably balanced and stable way like naturally evolved worlds. Instead, because of the bias of the attributes, they began to go through cycles of success, failure, and failure again and again. It could also be said that they were reincarnations of life and death. In fact, the light emitted by these countless worlds was actually a variety of strange phenomena released during the process of reincarnation of life and death. Among them, the speed of reincarnation of the worlds with millions of cultivators was completely different from the speed of other worlds. Some worlds were even faster, and in the time it took for other worlds to be born and die once, that world had already gone through thousands of reincarnations. And some worlds were even slower, and other worlds might have gone through thousands of reincarnations of life and death, but that world had only gone through one reincarnation of life and death. Of course, this did not mean that the changes in this world had slowed down. It was just that the changes in this world were changing in the direction of maintaining its balance, and there was some kind of power supporting this world. Every reincarnation of life and death in that world was a manifestation of the comprehensive power of the integrated concepts. In other words, it was the complete manifestation of the process of birth, growth, degeneration, and death. And each of these processes was enough for Luo Fan to have a deeper understanding of the concepts that had integrated into it, and to understand the hidden power of that concept that he had not thought of before. And this would be reflected in his view of the world. It caused his worldview to undergo subtle adjustments, or some parts to become more tenacious, or some parts to become brighter, or some bright spots to become bigger, and no matter which it was. It made him feel an inexplicable sense of satisfaction in his heart. Among them, the most obvious change was naturally the world with millions of cultivators. After all, although those worlds themselves had cycles of life and death, it was only their own operation, after all. All kinds of changes were natural evolutions, and it might take many reincarnations to be able to force out certain mysteries, so the speed would naturally not be too fast. In contrast, if cultivators joined in because they stimulated that world with external forces, it would naturally cause more changes in that world, causing the changes that might have taken several reincarnations to be directly revealed, and this would naturally greatly speed up his comprehension. In addition, the addition of external forces would cause the changes in those worlds to be more intense, and the number of reincarnations of life and death per unit of time would increase, which would naturally greatly increase his comprehension efficiency. For Luo Fan, this was a huge benefit, but it was not the same for the cultivators who were immersed in those worlds. Although most cultivators were able to comprehend many mysteries related to their cultivation and vaguely sense the various appearances of those concepts, thus allowing their cultivation to improve greatly or slightly. However, there were still some cultivators who felt like they had fallen into hell and were suffering in the worlds they were immersed in. Those worlds contained the internal concepts of Luo Fan's worldview. This concept changed the world, causing the nature of those worlds to be fundamentally different from all the worlds that these cultivators had seen in the past. Under such circumstances, if these cultivators treated these worlds the same way they treated those worlds in the past, they would inevitably be devoured by those worlds if they were not careful. In the end, they could only sink into those worlds and reincarnate with those worlds again and again. In this way, for Luo Fan, there would naturally not be any changes. The increase in comprehension efficiency would still be the increase in comprehension efficiency, and the more comprehension that should be obtained, the more comprehension that should be obtained, the more comprehension that should be obtained. However, for these cultivators themselves, it was a great disaster. From time to time, because some cultivators could not bear this change, they directly triggered their preparations in the outside world and triggered the rules of the Tao Master's path. They directly activated the power of the Tao Master's prison and were dragged into the Tao Master's prison to escape the torture of life and death reincarnation. In fact, this kind of torture was actually bearable for them. What really made them take this action without hesitation was the legend that there might be a great tribulation. For the cultivators who were being tortured, every time they were tortured, their thoughts would be directed towards the legend, and it seemed to confirm that the tribulation was coming for them. Chapter 2045. Just like that, time passed, and before anyone knew it, another 10,000 years had passed. During these 10,000 years, the changes to the star wave attracted more and more cultivators entered the star wave, entering the world that was like the sun. Apart from the cultivators who entered from the outside world, the cultivators who were originally rushing over from the star wave also arrived one after another. They entered the world and began to enter the world. Of course, it was not that there were no cultivators who wanted to refine this world and become the ruler of the entire world. However, none of these cultivators succeeded. They didn't even need Luo Fan to make a move. The rejection from the other cultivators had already caused them to return without accomplishing anything. Some of the unlucky ones even died a violent death from fighting with the other cultivators. Their bodies and Tao disappeared and their souls scattered. Even if there were brilliant cultivators who could resist the rejection of other cultivators, in the end, they were unable to withstand the backlash of the heavens and earth during the process of refining this world, and were directly annihilated and devoured by the heavens and earth. Over the past 10,000 years, there were tens of thousands of such cultivators. However, in the end, none of them alarmed Luo Fan, forcing him to make a move. One day, 2 cultivators arrived outside of heaven and earth. At first glance, these 2 cultivators looked very ordinary, just like ordinary people. There was nothing special about them. However, if one took a closer look, they would discover that they were stronger than almost all the cultivators on the second level of the Tao Sovereign Path. Moreover, they weren't just 1 or 2 times stronger, but hundreds or thousands of times stronger. If Luo Fan had noticed them, he would have discovered that these 2 cultivators had surpassed the second tribulation. They were at least third tribulation powerhouses. Obviously, they were cultivators who had reversed the path from the third level of the Tao Sovereign Path and returned to the second level of the Tao Sovereign Path. The 2 cultivators quietly looked at the world that was like the sun in front of them. There was a strong desire to explore in their eyes. I didn't expect such a world to be born. It seems that the destruction of the star wave. There's finally hope. This was what one of the cultivators said. These 2 cultivators both had the appearance of middle-aged men. One was slightly plump, while the other was as thin as a bamboo pole. However, be it fat or thin, the 2 cultivators naturally gave off a calming aura. Their eyes shone with an extremely strong light of wisdom, as if there were no secrets in their eyes, and they could see everything clearly with just a glance. The one who spoke just now, it was none other than the skinny cultivator. Even so, it's only a possibility. In the end, taking such a huge risk just for this possibility is a little inappropriate. The slightly chubby cultivator sighed. What's inappropriate about it? This star wave has been standing in the second layer since ancient times, and the source behind it is a chaotic world. If we can get it, the hope of breaking through the third layer will soar by 100 times. For this hope, what's the harm in taking a little risk? The thin bamboo pole lightly said, "This is not a small risk. If we're discovered by the Tao Sovereign's prison, we'll be imprisoned for eternity." The slightly plump cultivator remained the same. The path of a Tao master could only be taken forward, not backward. This was the fundamental rule. Unless one was able to leave the first level of the Tao master's path due to various special opportunities. After returning to the big world, the path of Tao master at other levels could not be reversed. In other words, once a cultivator stepped into the second layer, he would immediately be killed. Then he would never be able to return to the first floor. Once he stepped into the third level, he wouldn't be able to return to the second level, and so on. Of course, there were countless cultivators with extraordinary wisdom. Since there was a restriction, there was naturally a countermeasure. From ancient times to the present, and even from today to the infinitely distant future, the number of cultivators who had devoted themselves to the path of Tao Master had almost exceeded the limit of the number of numbers. Among so many cultivators, it was almost inevitable that there would be a cultivator who could open up a method that could reverse the path of a Tao Master. And this method was developed. It was only natural for it to spread. Therefore, by now, almost all of the slightly more brilliant cultivators would be able to do so. But they already knew how to go against the Tao Master's path, from a high-level Tao Master to a low-level Tao Master. Obviously, the two cultivators in front of them had used this method to reverse the path of a Tao Master from the third level to the second level of the Tao Master's path. And this kind of reverse was against the rules of the Tao Master's path. Once detected by the Tao Master's path, they would inevitably be led by the Tao Master's prison and eventually be thrown into the Tao Master's prison. According to past experience, the most likely punishment for such a crime that violated the fundamental rules of the Tao Master's path was eternal imprisonment. And it was said that this punishment was not the worst punishment. It seemed that there was also a punishment that could directly destroy one's soul, but this punishment did not say what kind of crime would be met with it. It's not difficult to find a way to escape from prison. The thin bamboo pole said lightly. There was no nervousness in his expression. Hearing this, the slightly fat cultivator's expression changed, and he said, "What do you mean? Didn't you say that you would never be discovered? Why are you already preparing to escape at this time?" "Of course I'm confident, but it's better to have a clear plan," the thin bamboo pole said. When the slightly fat cultivator heard this, his face turned red. "I knew I shouldn't have trusted you. The others warned me," he murmured, and there was a hint of regret in his eyes. "Don't think too much. Now that things have come to this point, the most important thing is to settle this world in front of us. As long as we can settle this part of the world, everything else will naturally not happen," the thin bamboo pole said with a smile. At this time, the slightly fat cultivator could only sigh helplessly at this time. Since things had come to this point, what else could they do? At this moment, the two cultivators sighed and each stepped towards this part of the world. Soon, they had already arrived at the inside of this part of the world. However, compared with the other cultivators who had stepped into this part of the world, their position was somewhat different. Other cultivators who had stepped into this part of the world, no matter how far away they were from each other, would inevitably be separated into random areas after stepping into this part of the world. They would arrive at the place where the world was in harmony with them. But the two of them were different. After they entered this part of the world, they appeared in a void somewhere in this part of the world. The positions of the two did not have the slightest deviation. They were still gathered together, completely not affected by the power of this part of the world itself. What a wonderful world. Just now, I felt a kind of attraction on my body and was almost transmitted over. The slightly fat cultivator exclaimed, "This is the resonance of the same attribute. I didn't expect that in the second layer, there would be a cultivator who could use this method." The thin bamboo pole's face showed an inexplicable smile. "This is even better. The more wonderful this world is after we control it, we can get more control over this star wave," the slightly fat cultivator said with a frown. At this time, How could he still see the appearance of the thin bamboo pole before? Exactly. It seems at this time we have found a wonderful foothold. The thin bamboo pole said lightly. For the two of them, this second layer of the Tao Master's path was a rural place. All the cultivators here were only at the level of ants in their eyes. If they wanted to get anything here, the opponent they encountered was only the second layer of the Tao Master's path itself, not any of the cultivators here. Therefore, at this moment, even if they had seen the wonders of this part of the world, they did not put the creator of this part of the world in their eyes, nor did they take into account the dangers that would inevitably be encountered to control this part of the world. The two of them moved forward in this void, their figures flashing, heading towards the center of this part of the world. They did not see the existence of Luo Fan in the center of this part of the world, but they knew that if the existence that controlled the core of this part of the world existed, it must be related to this center. At least, the most likely location was in the center of this part of the world. With such a thought, the first thing they did was obviously to go to the center of this part of the world. Although this part of the world was vast and boundless for these two cultivators, it was nothing at all. With their ability to manipulate time and space, the speed of their advance was faster than the imagination of the other cultivators. In just a few breaths of time, they had crossed the boundary and arrived at the center of this world, which was also the center of the encirclement of countless worlds. They were also the axis on which the worlds revolved. This is indeed the core of this part of the world. The moment they saw the center, the thin bamboo pole smiled. It's here. They're still searching in that mess. I didn't expect the core to be clearly placed here. The slightly plump cultivator also seemed inexplicably happy. They had found the core and wanted to control this core. It was only a matter of time before they could control this world, which also meant that the process of eliminating the star waves was a matter of course. In that case, the possibility of them being discovered by the Tao Master's prison was naturally very small. How could he not be excited? In their eyes, the core of this part of the world was a void. In this void, there were various mysterious and subtle fluctuations that spread out, connecting with the countless worlds in this part of the world. These fluctuations were very subtle and incomparably subtle. If it were not for the fact that they had already stepped into the third level of the Tao Master's path, which was equivalent to a 3-tribulation expert, it would be impossible for them to sense the existence of such fluctuations. Even at this time, the fluctuations were only faintly discernible, and it was even difficult for them to identify the specific appearance of the fluctuations. In this case, it was no wonder that the cultivators in the second level of the Tao Master's path did not discover this special part of the central part. After all, in their eyes, this central part was just a void without any physical existence, let alone the existence of anything special. Compared to other areas where one could sense the abnormality of such a place, was there still a need to say who was more likely to be the core of this part of the world? The two cultivators circled around this central part a few times, but could only sense the existence of the fluctuations. As for the specific mysteries of the core, they could not see at all. This situation made the two of them frown. The changes in this core actually exceeded what we could sense. Such thoughts flashed through their minds. Why don't we attack it? The slightly fatter cultivator frowned. If they attacked, they might be counterattacked. It would cause a certain amount of trouble. However, in the absence of any information that could be grasped, an attack could make something that was originally unchanging change. Even if that change was from the original silent motionlessness to an attack. That was also a good thing for them to sense the defense here. This proposal. Soon, it was agreed by the thin bamboo pole. This was also a matter of course. The thin bamboo pole's confidence in himself was much stronger than that of the fat cultivator. Even the fat cultivator didn't think that he would be injured by the core's backlash, so he naturally didn't doubt that such a situation would occur. The two of them unified their opinions, and their faces revealed a dignified expression. Confidence was confidence, but caution was still necessary. After all, they were powerful cultivators who had stepped into the first and second level of the Tao Master's path. It was needless to say what kind of mentality they should have when fighting. After all, The two of them had cooperated for countless years, and at this time, they cooperated with each other very tacitly. One of them attacked, and the other defended. There was no need to arrange. At the moment, the thin bamboo pole let out a light shout, raised his hand, and pointed to the central void. Countless fluctuations were emitted from his hand at this moment, gathering into a mysterious force, directly crushing the surrounding space-time, causing the surrounding space-time to collapse under its crushing, turning into space-time smoke, rolling toward the central void. Within this mysterious power, there were traces of concepts hidden within it. However, this concept was also not pure. Although it was not as messy as the concept in the rock that Luo Fan obtained before, such a combination of concepts made the power beyond the state it should have. It began to increase thousands of times. The released, terrifying power spread wildly in all directions. In the blink of an eye, it had covered the entire world, so that the countless cultivators in this world felt this incomparably terrifying existence at this moment. One by one, their complexion changed greatly, and their eyes showed a kind of indescribable shock. At the same time, the slightly fatter cultivator had already made a move. He raised his hand in a circle, and a halo appeared around the two of them. This halo slightly contracted and trembled, as if a living creature's heart was beating, and there was an indescribable vitality constantly released from this halo. It also constantly spread to all parts of the world. When the force came to the place where the void was, the halo was also completely wrapped around the two of them. Both happened almost at the same time. There was no difference in the slightest. The degree of tacit understanding was beyond imagination. At this moment, a cold snort came from the void. With this cold snort, a palm appeared out of thin air, directly grabbing the power that had just reached that position, and it even broke out of control and disrupted the nomological laws. The power itself was invisible and intangible, and it was impossible to be touched by an entity. But at this moment, facing the palm, the power seemed to have turned into an ordinary rope and was easily caught by the palm. Who is it? At this time, the thin bamboo pole let out a cry of surprise. At this moment, many of his enemies on the third level of the Tao Master's road flashed in his mind. One by one, their figures appeared in his mind, and at the same time disappeared from his heart. In the end, it turned into a blank, because no enemy could do what the palm in front of him could do. Run! The slightly fatter cultivator at this moment shouted decisively, pulling the thin bamboo pole and rushed straight out. In the blink of an eye, they had already broken through countless barriers and were about to step out of this side of the world. At this time, a calm but boundless majesty voice sounded behind them. "You've disturbed me. Do you want to leave like this?" With such a voice, an indescribable subtle force suddenly acted on them. Under this force, all their defensive means could not produce even the slightest bit of effect. Their bodies were pulled back quickly, and in the blink of an eye, they had already returned to their original position. That is, the position where they were facing the center of the world. At this moment, it was no longer empty. Instead, there was a figure standing there quietly. In the figure's hand, the power released by the thin bamboo pole was casually hanging there like an ordinary ribbon. Seeing that they had arrived, the figure seemed to smile. He grabbed out with his hand, and the ring of light released by the slightly plump cultivator instantly broke free from his grasp. Like a wave of power, it fell into the figure's hand. As it gently rolled, it looked like an ordinary plastic ring. Good power, but it's a pity that you still haven't touched the essence. At this time, such words came from the figure's mouth. Immediately afterwards, the two forces trembled slightly before collapsing with a loud bang, as if they were made of sand. There were no special fluctuations, let alone any earth-shattering explosion or impact. Chapter 2046. The figure that appeared was, of course, Luo Fan. Previously, he had been comprehending the various subtle changes that had occurred after the various concepts had been integrated into the world. He had not been in the mood to care about the choices made by the cultivators who had entered this world. He had even not imposed any punishment on those who had the intention to refine this world and take it for themselves. However, he had not expected that there would be a cultivator who could find him here and even use some power that was enough to disturb his cultivation to attack him. This forced him to wake up. After he woke up, he discovered a shocking fact. In the second level of the Tao Master's path, there was actually a cultivator who had surpassed the second tribulation besides him. It was a pity that although the two cultivators had attached a stronger concept to their power, the concept was still not pure. It was still obtained from a special cultivation method or from a certain extreme in some other direction. It was not something that was added to their power by truly comprehending the profundities of the world. This situation reminded him of the cultivator he had encountered in the rock-like world before. That cultivator had also used a similar method to integrate some chaotic concepts into his power. And that cultivator had obviously reached this step from the side because of the star wave, or rather, the Tao Master's path. From this, it could be boldly deduced that the two cultivators in front of him might have also reached this step because of the Tao Master's path. That was why they had condensed a concept that was 10 times or even 100 times stronger than that cultivator's. Through this, naturally, it could be known that these two cultivators were not like him at all. They had not raised their own realm to surpass the second level of the Tao Master's path. That was why they had surpassed the second level of the Tao Master's path. Then, it was obvious what kind of existence they were and why they were here. They must have passed the second level of the Tao Master's path and stepped into the third level of the Tao Master's path. After that, they had returned to this place through some special means. I want to know, how can I enter the third level of the Tao Master's path? Luo Fan immediately said to them. These words instantly reached the ears of the thin bamboo pole and the slightly fat cultivator. It was like a roar of thunder that shook the two of them. This is not a secret. I don't think you need to get this information from us. The thin bamboo said at this time. Although he had already opened his mouth, his eyes were still filled with disbelief. Clearly, he still hadn't recovered from Luo Fan's unimaginable technique. To him, it was only natural. Luo Fan's means were beyond his imagination. After he stepped into the third level of the Tao Master Path, his strength had already undergone a qualitative transformation. Although this transformation could not be described in words, and even he himself could not explain it clearly, it was enough to make him stand above all the cultivators who had not entered the third level of the Tao Master's path. It even made him feel, if he were to encounter himself before he had stepped into the third level, he would not need to use any methods. He would only need to release a burst of power and suppress it slightly, and it would be enough to make him die without a grave. In fact, not even a single mark would be left behind. Under such circumstances, in the second level of the Tao Master's path, there was suddenly a power that could casually rub against him. He could even use such a superior attitude to comment that his strength had not reached the essence. How could not be shocked? How could not be in disbelief? He even suspected that the cultivator in front of him had gone against the flow from the higher level of the Tao Master's path to the second level of the Tao Master's path. If not, how could he have done such an incredible thing? When he thought of this, an indescribable excitement suddenly rose from the bottom of his heart. An indescribable hope suddenly surged in his eyes, and he suddenly changed the topic. Senior is indeed unparalleled, but in order to come here, Senior must have taken a great risk. Although we are not strong, I think that if Senior were to fight against us, the chances of you being discovered by the Tao Master's prison would be much higher than usual. Hearing this, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. In the blink of an eye, he already understood the mentality of the thin bamboo pole and could not help but laugh. It seems that you think that I win against the flow from a higher level. He just said indifferently. At this time, the slightly plump cultivator had also come to a realization. A look of excitement appeared on his face as he said, "Is it not? We only obtained our abilities after stepping into the third level. To be able to take away our power so easily, how could Senior not go against the flow from a higher level?" Luo Fan did not bother to explain to them. He just said, "Whatever you think is up to you. Now, all you need to do is to answer my question." The expression on the thin bamboo pole's face changed slightly. He said, "Senior, do you really think that you could defeat us? If we cause the power of the Tao Master's prison to descend, with senior status, I'm afraid that you will also be affected. Since both of us have scruples, why do you still want to fool us like this?" "You could try," Luo Fan said indifferently. The thin bamboo pole's body trembled slightly under the indifferent gaze of Luo Fan. After all, the difference in strength was obvious. Even if the thin bamboo pole thought that he had the ability to make Luo Fan fear him, he did not dare to ignore the difference in strength. At this time, he naturally had great scruples and could not directly let Luo Fan know that he could not be messed with at will. The slightly plump cultivator at this time sneered, "Don't think that you are great just because you are of a higher level. We have only gone against the flow of one level, but you have gone against the flow of at least 2 levels. If we are discovered by the Tao Master's prison, we will only be imprisoned for life. Moreover, with our means, we may be able to escape from prison. In contrast, if you are discovered, it is very likely that your soul will fly away and scatter. Such a different price. I don't believe that you are not afraid. If you have the guts, force us to flip the table." Hearing this, Luo Fan felt that it was even more funny. At this moment, he no longer talked nonsense, and his heart moved. In an instant, the still messy ideas contained in the two forces were purified. The ineffective ideas were extracted, and the effective ideas were greatly strengthened. With his action, the halo and the ribbon-like power suddenly trembled and instantly emitted a light that was many times stronger than before. It looked like 2 huge suns were compressed above his hands. A kind of aura that was many times stronger than before was released from the two. It caused the surrounding time and space to begin to distort. It even faintly changed the rules of law, so that the rules of law seemed to begin to respond to these 2 forces. How is this possible? At this time, the thin bamboo pole and the slightly plump cultivator could not help but exclaim. That was clearly their power, but in the hands of the other party, there was such a huge change. That kind of strengthening was almost like being reborn. This had already subverted their worldview. As far as they were concerned, their own power was completely their own. If others could break it, they could do it. Others could break it and even control it, but absolutely could not easily change the essence of that power. What was the original power, unless they changed it themselves? Otherwise, in the end, the essence must be the only thing that would not change. But now, in the hands of this expert who might be at the 4th level of the road to Tao Master, this power directly changed and even formed a strong oppression on them, as if a high and mighty deity was oppressing an ordinary mortal. That kind of feeling was so sour and refreshing. It went without saying, "Oh no, this expert in front of me is probably stronger than I thought. Maybe it is not from the 4th level, but from the 5th or even the 6th or 7th level." Such a thought flashed through the thin bamboo pole's mind. With this thought, cold sweat instantly came down. An indescribable panic and regret almost swallowed him, and his body could not help but tremble slightly. If it was the 4th level, then it would only be 1 level higher than them. Although there was already an intrinsic difference, and it was enough to suppress them. It was, after all, not to the point where it was boundless. Their threat might not have a huge effect, but it would still have some effect. However, if the expert in front of them was from a higher level, then their threat was obviously as absurd as an ant threatening to trip an elephant. With the gap between the 2nd and 3rd level of the road of Tao Master, it could be imagined how incredible the divine sense of such an expert would be, and how much it would exceed the limit of their imagination. In the face of such an existence, he had no hope at all to complete his threat to the opponent. Perhaps before he could even take any action, the other party would have already stopped him. Thinking of this, Luo Fan's previous calmness had become a matter of course. Even such calmness could be regarded as the confirmation of his panic speculation. After understanding this, the thin bamboo pole was even more afraid. At this time, the slightly fat cultivator was about to say something, but the thin bamboo pole's face suddenly changed, and suddenly punched the slightly fat cultivator in the abdomen, causing him to fly out directly across dozens of worlds before stopping. Blood spurted from his mouth, but his eyes were extremely blank. "Senior, please forgive us. Just now we were really out of our minds. I hope that Senior will forgive us and forgive us," the thin bamboo pole said to Luo Fan. This change in attitude was so fast that even Luo Fan felt a little unable to react, not to mention the slightly fat cultivator. "Oh, have you thought about it?" Luo Fan became curious. He casually kneaded the two powers that came from the two cultivators in front of him into a ball. In the blink of an eye, it was like kneading glutinous rice and sugar together. The two merged into one, turning into a completely different power that lay quietly in his hand. Such a performance made the thin bamboo pole's face change again, and he was even more convinced of his speculation. At this time, the slightly fat cultivator saw this scene and suddenly sobered up, cold sweat crazily pouring down. His eyes were full of fear, and faintly there was a kind of gratitude towards the thin bamboo pole. It was Luo Fan's performance that finally let him know that the thin bamboo pole did that to save him. He also understood that the cultivator in front of them, who they originally thought was from the fourth layer, was most likely a higher existence. At the moment, he did not stop the bleeding, and while spurting blood from the side, he came forward, bowed to Luo Fan, and quickly begged for mercy. Seeing their performance, Luo Fan could not help but be disappointed, sighed, and said, "I originally wanted to see your real means. I didn't expect you to give in so quickly. It's really boring." Hearing this, the two cultivators in front of him were slightly changed. Their eyes were both helpless and lucky. "No wonder you didn't say it clearly before. It turned out to be to lure us. Fortunately, I was smart. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would be dead now." Similar thoughts flashed through their minds. Now, they no longer had the slightest confidence that they could receive the power of the town master's prison in front of Luo Fan, and did not dare to hope that the power of the town master's prison could help them escape from the control of this terrifying expert in front of them. "Well, answer my previous question." Luo Fan lightly rubbed the power in his hand. He said so. Hearing this, the thin bamboo pole and the slightly fat cultivator could not help but be slightly stunned. They did not expect that Luo Fan would actually want to know this. Although this question was not a big nor small secret among the cultivators of the second layer of the town master's path, it was definitely not difficult to find out. Even as long as one had enough strength, they could understand it without asking. Under such circumstances, it was really difficult for them to understand that this expert, who was most likely an expert of the fifth layer or even higher, would actually ask them about this. However, even the imagination of ordinary people was extremely incredible. This kind of cultivator was countless times more powerful than ordinary people in all aspects. The ability of his imagination was even more terrifying. Soon, the thin bamboo pole thought of a possibility. Could it be he has never reached the second layer of the town master's path? Thinking of this, he was even more in awe, and the expression on his face became even more respectful. Not reaching the second layer of the town master's path, but being able to reach a higher layer of the town master's path. This seemed contradictory, but in fact it was very normal. The most common situation for this to happen was that in the higher layers of the town master's path, for example, the third layer of the town master's path was born, and then continued to climb, and finally reached a very high level, such as the fifth layer of the town master's path. In this case, it was reasonable that this cultivator in front of them had not reached the second layer of the town master's path at all. The cultivators in the town master's path were the existence of that kind of extremely high realm, the firmness of their heart, and the tenacity of their Taoist heart. For cultivators at this level, it was difficult for them to have feelings between men and women. As for things like giving birth to children, it was even rarer. However, rare did not mean that it would not happen. There were so many cultivators in the town master's path, even if the probability was small, it was bound to happen in the end. Therefore, in any level of the town master's path, there were actually some cultivators who married with each other and gave birth to children. And these creatures that were born because of the union of cultivators were naturally born in that level of the town master's path. This kind of cultivator had a powerful background and a shocking, fortuitous encounter. It was not difficult to cultivate a certain magical power. However, at a higher level, such a background would become their shackles. It made it more difficult for them to embark on their own path, so that there was a great chance that they would eventually be limited by their parents, and it would be difficult to surpass them. Under such circumstances, once a cultivator could break this shackle, it meant that their will, their wisdom, their Taoist heart, and their ability had reached an unimaginable level. At least, it was far beyond the realm of the cultivator's wisdom, Taoist heart, and ability. It was because of this understanding that the thin bamboo in front of him suddenly had a deep respect for Luo Fan. This was not respect for his identity, but respect for his great wisdom and his heart of the great Tao. The slightly fat cultivator's reaction was not so fast. At this time, he still did not react. He suddenly said foolishly, "Senior should have passed through. Why do you still need to ask us?" Did Senior cultivate until his brain was damaged and forgot? Hearing this, the thin bamboo's expression changed. He secretly regretted that he should not have gone against the flow to the second level of the Tao Master's path. At the moment, he quickly said, "Senior, please don't bother with him. This fool is a fat pig, and his brain is usually short of tendons." The slightly fat cultivator was somewhat indignant, but after all, he was not really stupid. At this time, he also realized that this was not the time to say such words. The thin bamboo was obviously saying this to save him. At the moment, he forcibly suppressed his desire to refute and directly shut his mouth. Luo Fan just shook his head and said, "I did not go through such a leap." The thin bamboo's heart was even more certain of his previous speculation. Without waiting for the slightly fat cultivator to speak, he quickly said all kinds of ways to break through the second level of the Town Master's path and step into the third level. To enter the third level of the Town Master's path, there was not only one way to enter the second level from the first level. According to the research and experiments of countless cultivators from ancient times to the present, there were at least two ways to enter the third level. The first way was to directly through cultivation and trigger the ascension tribulation of the second level of the Town Master's path. Once this tribulation was passed, naturally one could step into the third level. The second way was to break through any kind of vision in the second level and naturally step into the third level. Chapter 2047. Listening to the description of the thin bamboo pole, Luo Fan suddenly felt that a vast world had opened up in front of him. After stepping into the second level of the Tao Master's path, he had been cultivating in the Star Wave. As for the other mysterious places in the second level of the Tao Master's path, he did not know. Now that he heard the description of the thin bamboo pole, he just understood that the Star Wave was actually just such an ordinary thing in the second layer. In addition to this, there were so many mysterious places that were no less than the Star Wave waiting for him to comprehend. Sure enough, entering the Tao Master's path is really the right choice. Thinking so in his heart, he could not help but show a faint smile on his face. Seeing such a smile, the thin bamboo pole naturally felt some kind of indescribable joy from the bottom of his heart. He felt as if he had been immersed in the sea of joy. All his experiences, all his hardships, and even all his losses seemed to have no trace left in his heart. All that was left in his body and mind was that kind of unexplainable joy. He was like this, but the slightly fat cultivator's performance was even more excessive. At this time, he was even grinning. The laughter spread far away and even stirred up many worlds in this side of the world, causing many worlds to begin to tremble, causing the creatures inside these worlds to be inexplicably frightened. They did not know what was going on and why there was such a terrible laughter. Not good. We were affected by his smile. After all, the thin bamboo pole was more knowledgeable. At this time, he suddenly realized what was going on. However, although he knew what was going on, he still could not stop the boundless joy in his heart, and it was difficult to control his smile. In fact, the reason why he was like this was very simple. It was because after these days of constant enlightenment, Luo Fan had unconsciously integrated all kinds of ideas into his body and mind. At this time, he was happy from the bottom of his heart, but it naturally integrated the idea of joy into his smile, and then affected the cultivators who saw his smile, so that they were infected by this idea and naturally produced this kind of uncontrollable joy. As for why he was fine before, now it was even simpler. Before, Luo Fan did not have the joy from the bottom of his heart, so it was naturally difficult to lead the idea of joy into his smile. So that's how it is. Compared with the brand, this is a different kind of mystery. Soon, Luo Fan found that the two of them were embarrassed. His heart was bright. As he reacted, the idea of joy was gradually withdrawn, and the thin bamboo pole and the slightly fat cultivator naturally recovered. At this time, both of them involuntarily took a step back, and there was an indescribable fear in their eyes. At this time, the two of them could not help but take a step back. They knew that their joy was influenced by external forces, but they could not control it at all. It was like robbing them of their will. This was absolutely intolerable even for ordinary people, let alone for these experts who had already stepped into the third level of the Tao Master's path. If it weren't for the fact that they couldn't fight against Luo Fan, they would have already fallen out with Luo Fan and become irreconcilable enemies. "Thank you for your mercy, Senior." The two gritted their teeth. In the end, they could only bow to Luo Fan and said, since they could not turn against him, they simply went to the limit and behaved as obediently as possible. "It was my mistake just now," Luo Fan just said lightly, but did not explain more. Hearing this, the thin bamboo pole and the slightly fat cultivator could only smile helplessly. If an ordinary person said this to them, they would have immediately turned hostile. But at this time, facing Luo Fan, they could only be more obedient and repeatedly said that it was nothing at all. No matter what Luo Fan wanted to do, it was up to him. "Why did you two come to this starwave station?" Luo Fan asked lightly. Just now, he was able to explain a little bit, which was already giving face to the two of them. At this time, he naturally could not be entangled in that matter. He did not want to entangle in that matter. The thin bamboo pole and the other cultivator did not dare to. Hearing the question, they did not dare to neglect and told him their goal. It turned out that there was a treasure hidden in this star wave that was said to allow cultivators to ignore the Tao Master's prison. As long as they could obtain this treasure, they could freely enter and exit any level to reach the Tao Master's path. They could even use all means to seize all the treasures that existed in the Tao Master's path. It could be said that this was the most powerful treasure for them who had mastered the Tao Master's path in reverse. This time, they heard some rumors that this star wave station was changing and was very likely to be destroyed, so they hurriedly left the third level and came here. Such a rumor actually spread to the third level. So, this place is about to become the target of many third-level cultivators? Luo Fan murmured. At this time, he suddenly raised his eyebrows. He suddenly felt that there were cultivators who were quite similar to the two in front of him, bumping into the range of the eternal world's perception. Moreover, there was more than one such cultivator, but more than a dozen of them. How many cultivators are there on the Tao Master's path in the third level? Luo Fan suddenly asked. No one knows. Maybe there are billions, maybe more. After all, the Tao Master's path is a supreme existence that connects the past, present, and future. Whether it is the cultivators who entered the Tao Master's path in the past or the future, they're all gathered together. The thin bamboo pole answered instinctively. But soon his expression changed. He originally guessed that Luo Fan was a cultivator born on the Tao Master's path in the third level. Now that he heard Luo Fan's words, he was actually unfamiliar with the third level of the Tao Master's path. Didn't that mean he might be a cultivator born on a higher level? One wrong step, and every step would be wrong. This cultivator's first step of deduction had already been wrong. No matter what method was used to deduce, the result could only be wrong. Even more, the more exquisite the method was, the more wrong the result would be. At this time, Luo Fan did not care what the thin bamboo pole thought. At this time, he was already shocked by what the thin bamboo pole said. billions past, present, future, he murmured in his heart. A cultivator on the third level of the Tao Master's path was equivalent to a three-tribulation expert who had passed through three great tribulations. Such an existence, even in the Tao Master Great World, would be an absolute expert. In an ordinary, perfect world, they could even suppress all other existences except for true saints. Such an expert was actually measured in hundreds of millions. Even he couldn't help but be indescribably shocked. In contrast, the Tao Master's path was a communication between the past, present, and future. Although it was extremely inconceivable to combine the past and the future that were infinitely far away, the degree of shock was much less than that of the past. As a matter of fact, he already had a rough guess about this. After all, before he had really entered the third level of the Tao Master's path, he had gone through a fork to the past of the Tao Master Great World, and finally returned to the Tao Master's path with the guidance of others. Even the checkpoints before entering the Tao Master's path could be moved at will to the past of the Tao Master Great World. Then, the real Tao Master's path could directly integrate the past, present, and future. It did not seem to be an incredible thing. However, if it is really the integration of the past, present, and future, then it seems reasonable that there are so many experts on the third level of the Tao Master's path. With a thought, he changed his mind. Even if it was a perfect world, its history might be calculated in billions of years. The Great World had no tribulations and existed for billions of times longer than the perfect world. Even if only one cultivator could step into the Tao Master's path in billions of years, under the long river of time, the number of cultivators who could enter the Tao Master's path must be calculated in billions of trillions. Among these trillions of cultivators, even if the number of cultivators who could go to the next level of the Tao Master's path was only 1 in a trillion, it was normal for the number of cultivators to be calculated in billions when it came to the third level of the Tao Master's path. Even if the number of cultivators who could enter the third level of the Tao Master's path was calculated in billions, it could be seen how difficult it was for cultivators to step into the third level of the Tao Master's path. Thinking of this, his expression became calm again, and an inexplicable longing emerged in his heart. If this is the case, how many experts will there be on the 8th and 9th level? While he was thinking, the skinny bamboo pole and the slightly fat cultivator's expressions were incomparably perturbed. After a while, Luo Fan came back to his senses. He said to them, "You go back. This place will become a battlefield. The power of the Tao Master's prison should sweep through like rain." Hearing this, the thin bamboo pole and the slightly fat cultivator could not help but change their expressions. Although they behaved so lowly in front of Luo Fan, there were also experts who could go against the Tao Master's path. In an instant, they heard Luo Fan's determination from his words and did not dare to hesitate. They quickly asked for leave from Luo Fan, and after receiving Luo Fan's consent, they turned around and quickly left this side of the world. Then they left the Star Wave and quickly returned to the third level of the Tao Master's path. They did not want to continue to stay on the second level for even a moment. Just at the moment when they were about to step into the ascension formation that they had prepared, a strange power suddenly descended where they were and instantly appeared in front of them. The moment this power emerged, the two of them felt an indescribable horror shrouding them. It seemed that in the next moment, they would not be able to withstand the suppression of this power and completely collapse under the power. "Oh no, he's going to attack us." At this time, the thin bamboo pole exclaimed. In the second level of the Tao Master's path, the only existence that could make them not even the slightest resistance was Luo Fan, whom they had just met. Now that this power had appeared, the two of them thought that the only possibility was that Luo Fan wanted to kill them and silence them. "No, that's not right. This is the power of both of us," the slightly fat cultivator suddenly exclaimed. Compared to the thin bamboo pole, the slightly fat cultivator's mind was not as sharp, and his reaction was a beat slower. Just now, when the thin bamboo pole felt the irresistible power, he instantly thought of all kinds of possibilities. This slightly chubby cultivator was different. When he sensed the power, he didn't think too much about it. Instead, He began to sense the power and trace the source of the power. He wanted to find the purpose of the existence that released this power through this understanding. It was this difference that allowed the slightly fat cultivator to know what this power was before the thin bamboo pole did. Hearing his words, the thin bamboo pole was slightly stunned and carefully felt the power that stopped in front of them. The expression on his face constantly changed. Finally, he let out a long breath, and with a wave of his hand, the power floated towards him. Finally, it fell into his hand, formed a small crystal, and slowly rolled over his palm. "This is our reward," he murmured. This voice was just audible to the slightly fat cultivator. After the slightly fat cultivator heard this, his expression changed slightly. Then his fluctuating expression turned into a kind of indescribable excitement and gratitude. The two looked at each other and immediately bowed in the direction of the star wave. Then they turned around and stepped into the ascension formation, activating the formation. In a flash of light, the two of them had disappeared from the second level of the Tao Master's path and quickly headed towards the third level. The power just now was none other than the power that the two of them had previously sent to Luo Fan. This power originally came from the thin bamboo pole and the slightly fat cultivator, and it contained the countless messy ideas that the two of them had added to it. For the two of them, this kind of power, it was just that the accumulation of their power was of no use at all. However, after being obtained by Luo Fan, he used his own will to purify these ideas, eliminate the messy and useless ones, and then mix the two, purify them again, and then eliminate them again. Now, it had turned into a kind of great existence that was rooted in their own power, but surpassed their own power. Such an existence, if they could comprehend it, perhaps they would not be able to directly comprehend the fundamental mystery contained in it, but they could form a guide to improve their own strength, pointing out the direction of their own strength. In this way, the benefits to them were great. But it went without saying. It could be said that to them, even if they obtained the hidden treasure in the star wave, it could not compare to this power. It was precisely because of this that the two of them were so grateful to Luo Fan. They were grateful to the thin bamboo pole and the slightly fat cultivator. Although Luo Fan saw this, he did not care. The most important reason why he gave the power to the two of them was that the power had already been condensed in his hands. If he did not give it to them, it would only be a waste. In addition, the two of them had been very cooperative and answered many of his questions. So, he gave the power that was going to be wasted anyway to them. Just as Luo Fan threw the power to the two of them, the cultivators who had also descended from the third level of the Tao Master's path had also arrived around the eternal world that he had opened up. The dozen or so cultivators were currently surrounding the eternal world, their eyes filled with curiosity and greed. As expected, the information we received was correct. This world is indeed very likely to be able to destroy such a star wave. An extremely fat woman said with great satisfaction, "Goddess Zhong, it should be our turn this time, right?" Beside her, an extremely thin, middle-aged cultivator said, "Of course you can do it. This is what we've agreed on before. However, you only have one chance. If you don't succeed, then don't blame me for taking action." Goddess Zhong chuckled. Although she was a woman, her appearance was rather repulsive. She did not have the appearance of a normal female cultivator at all. "Oomph. It's just a small world. What is it to us? Goddess, you won't have the chance to take action." The thin, middle-aged cultivator's face was full of excitement and greed as he said so. As he spoke, he called out to the other cultivators and boldly rushed towards the world. In the blink of an eye, he had already rushed into the world with the other 5 cultivators and split up into 6 different directions. Vaguely, they formed a huge refining array. Like the cultivators in the second level of the Tao Master's path, they were also not affected by the rules. They did not randomly appear around the world that corresponded to them, but appeared where they wanted to appear. They're even wilder than the other two. I wonder where this confidence comes from. At this moment, Luo Fan, who was watching all of this from the center of the world, did not know whether to laugh or cry. At this moment, the 6 of them were 100 times more arrogant than the skinny bamboo pole and the slightly chubby cultivator. From the looks of it, it was clear that they wanted to completely refine this eternal world with their own power. They didn't care at all about the possible rulers of this world, nor did they care about the obstacles that all the cultivators in this world might cause to them. At this moment, Goddess Zhong's expression slightly stiffened as she looked at the actions of the 6 of them. She thought to herself, I didn't expect that they would use the safest method to refine this world just to be wary of me. It seems that this trip will be in vain this time. Chapter 2049. As they released their auras, an indescribable power appeared out of thin air around them. In a flash, they had already disappeared without a trace. Throughout the entire process, whether it was the world itself, the indestructible concept that gushed out from the depths of the world, or even the star wave itself, it was as if they did not exist and could not stop it at all. Sure enough, they still disappeared just like that. Luo Fan sighed inwardly at this moment. Although he had seen the Dao Master's prison capture people many times, he still could not help but feel how small he was every time he saw it. The smaller the momentum, the greater the control over the power. The power of the Dao Master's prison could easily penetrate everything and directly capture the cultivators it wanted to capture. This itself meant that the star wave, the world, the indestructible concept, and everything else were insignificant to it. Only in this way could it achieve its goal with just the right amount of power. As the 6 cultivators disappeared, the power they left in the world was naturally completely annihilated by the indestructible concept. In the end, it completely melted into the world and was difficult to find. After doing all this, the indestructible concept shrank slightly and had already retracted back into the small hole. In the blink of an eye, it was as if it had never been there. The entire world was restored to its original state before the 6 cultivators entered. There was no difference at all, even the operating posture. There did not seem to be any changes, and it was still as calm as before. However, the world itself was so leisurely, but in the eyes of Goddess Zhong and the others outside the world, it was completely different. At this moment, the cultivators were all dumbfounded, and their eyes were filled with fear. What the hell happened just now? That power, Goddess Zhong murmured, and even her words were somewhat incoherent. This world, the cultivator with a protruding mouth and ape-like chin murmured even more. His emotions constantly leaked out from his body, stirring up the surrounding star wave and causing it to tumble endlessly. There were even faint, illusory worlds being born, but they were quickly destroyed and disappeared due to the changes in his emotions. It was obvious that this cultivator with a protruding mouth and ape-like chin was related to cultivation and emotions. Otherwise, with his realm, just the change in his emotions would not have triggered such a drastic change in the star wave itself. If other cultivators were to pay attention, they would definitely be able to discover some of the cultivation secrets of this monkey-like cultivator. Unfortunately, at this moment, all of them were already shocked by the performance of that world. At that moment, all of them were immersed in their own thoughts. None of them noticed what was happening to the cultivator's body. If it were us, we wouldn't be any better off than them. Another cultivator murmured, "No, we will definitely be stronger than them." Goddess Zhong suddenly shouted coldly. It was her control over her own mind that was stronger. Now, he had recovered from the previous shock. At this moment, the monkey-faced cultivator's transformation had completely disappeared. His body returned to its normal appearance. The various changes that had appeared around him could no longer be seen. That's right. Now that we know the trump card of this world, refining it is absolutely not a problem. He said, "What? You still don't want to give up?" The dumbfounded cultivator exclaimed. "Give up? Didn't you feel it? The indestructible aura just now." Goddess Zhong looked at the cultivator as if he was an idiot. The cultivator was slightly stunned. Then he suddenly came to his senses. His eyes revealed an indescribable greed. That's right. It's the indestructible aura. It's indestructible. As long as we can get it, It's only a matter of time before we become indestructible and indestructible. As he said that, his body could not help but tremble slightly. What was the purpose of these people's tireless efforts on the path of Tao Master? Wasn't it to become a true divine? And what was the purpose of becoming a true divine? Was it the most fundamental to be indestructible and indestructible? And now, right in front of them, a world with the mystery of indestructibility was right in front of them. It was waiting for them to take it. What a great opportunity this was. If they let go of such a world, they would simply be struck by lightning. At this time, the other cultivators also came to their senses. Their eyes were filled with indescribable greed, and they were even faintly red. Seeing the change in the other cultivators' expressions, a trace of disdain flashed in the depths of Goddess Zhong's eyes. The fact that she could almost be the leader of these cultivators meant that she naturally had extraordinary strength and knowledge. Therefore, while the other cultivators only noticed how precious the indestructible aura was, she was very clear about how terrifying the concept of indestructibility was. What was the most obvious thing about an indestructible existence? Wasn't it true divine? And there was no need to say how powerful a true divine was. The path of Tao Master that they had explored for countless trillions of years was opened by a true divine. Since a true divine was so powerful and terrifying, why would they think that an indestructible world would be weak? The monkey-faced cultivator also had a look of greed on his face, but there was a stern look in the depths of his eyes. His strength was inferior to Goddess Zhong, but his intelligence was extremely high. Moreover, he cultivated in a path related to emotions, so he was naturally aware of the changes in the emotions of the cultivators present here. He also knew that Goddess Zhong had already treated all of them as cannon fodder, and she intended to use them to probe that world. For any intelligent existence, no matter how strong or weak, it was unacceptable to be used as cannon fodder. Not to mention this powerful existence who had already reached the third level of the Tao Master's path. Faced with this fate of being used as cannon fodder, the monkey-faced cultivator's expression didn't change, but his mind was constantly working. He planned to think of a way out of this situation. Suddenly, his perception swept across the cultivators hidden around him. His face lit up, and he smiled. I believe you've all seen what happened to you just now. Although we've seen it and know the trump card of the world, it's hard to say that it won't have other trump cards. We still need to think about it in the long run. Goddess Zhong nodded with a smile, but there was a murderous intent in her eyes. This was simply ruining her plan. The monkey-faced cultivator naturally knew what his words meant to Goddess Zhong, so he quickly explained his plan. So we need some people to help us test it out. His words instantly enlightened all the cultivators present. That's right. Although we're the only ones from the third level, there are countless times more cultivators on the second level than on the third level. Isn't this absolutely sufficient manpower? The cultivators all came to a sudden realization, and their eyes lit up with joy. Then, their gazes turned to the many cultivators hidden in the distance, observing the world and them. Compared to them, these cultivators from the third level of the Tao Master's path could see through the obstruction of the star waves through various secret methods and indescribable means. The cultivators on the second level of the Tao Master's path didn't have the means to clearly see what was happening inside the world. Even the cultivators who understood the star waves the best could only vaguely see the world and the incomparably powerful cultivators hidden around it. Under such circumstances, they didn't need to worry about those cultivators understanding what had happened inside the eternal world. If they wanted to use them as cannon fodder, they didn't even need to use coercion. All they needed to do was tempt them with words. Go find them and bring them here. Take it as a form of guidance, Goddess Zhong said indifferently. Hearing this, the other cultivators snickered. Without hesitation, they turned around and unleashed their power. Waves of power pierced through the star waves and headed towards the cultivators. Although cultivators on the second level of the Tao Master's path could fuse their perception slightly, they still couldn't compare to cultivators on the third level. These cultivators on the second level had no ability to resist the cultivators on the third level. Soon, several hundred of them were caught by them and thrown in front of them. Seniors, what instructions do you have for us? The cultivators were very sensible. After being thrown in, they immediately spoke in a very docile manner. The situation was stronger than they were, so it was better to be obedient when their strength was inferior. Even ordinary people would be very angry to be caught in such a rude manner, let alone cultivators like them. However, in the face of an existence that could crush them to death with a single finger, they had no choice but to suppress their anger. The one who was communicating with these cultivators was naturally the monkey-faced cultivator with the sharp mouth and cheeks. He immediately went forward and began to talk incessantly to deceive these cultivators. He kept saying that the benefits of this world were too great for them to swallow, and that they needed people to help them set it up. That was why he had invited them here, so that they could explore this world together and reap the benefits from it. This speech was truly a deluge of heavenly flowers, and golden lotuses sprang up from the ground. Even though these cultivators didn't have a good first impression of them, in the end, a small half of them were actually persuaded. As for the remaining half who weren't persuaded, they clearly knew what the other party's goal was. Naturally, they could see the situation clearly. Even if they could see that they were going to be cannon fodder, they could only helplessly accept the arrangement. Besides, although it was a bit humiliating, it was still a decent opportunity. If they could gain something from it, it would be enough to comfort them from the humiliation. In particular, they actually had another advantage in the Down Master Path. That was, they could use the power of the Down Master Prison to capture them at any time to escape the fate of certain death. Even though entering the Down Master's prison might not seem like a good choice to most people, and could even be said to be a fate worse than death, it was still an advantage over certain death. This kind of method was not popular in the first level of the Down Master Path, but in the second level, it had become a life-saving method for almost all cultivators. After all, the cultivators in the first level of the Down Master Path were not strong enough. Once they entered the Down Master Prison, they would almost certainly be suppressed forever. In fact, no one had even heard of anyone being able to escape from the Down Master Prison. But the Down Master Path in the second level was different. Here, their strength and cultivation were not something that the cultivators on the first level could compare with. Although entering the Down Master Prison was not safe, and it was extremely difficult to escape, there was still a 1 or 2% chance of escaping. Not to mention, if they were prepared. It was not impossible to increase this chance by several times, although, even if it was increased, the chance was still extremely small. But compared to certain death, it was still a world of difference. It was precisely because of this that the second level of the Down Master Path would have people using the Down Master Prison as a life-saving method. Moreover, judging from the behavior of the cultivators who came from the third level of the Down Master's Road, they seemed to be in a similar situation. They treated the Down Master's Prison as a place to save their lives. Perhaps they could even weaken the punishment of the Down Master's Prison. It was because they had such a life-saving method. Even though these cultivators in the second level knew that they were likely to be used as cannon fodder, they did not fight to the death. Instead, under the arrangement of Goddess Zhong and the others, they began to enter the world in batches. Even with the protection of various powers, nearly half of the first batch of cultivators that entered the world could not withstand the natural laws of the world. They were scattered to various worlds, and even thrown into those worlds, unable to gather together. If they wanted to set up the corresponding formation and complete the arrangement of Goddess Zhong and the others, it would naturally not end in a short period of time, as they had expected. They're actually so weak. I've overestimated them. Goddess Zhong's expression was a little ugly as she looked at the many cultivators that had been torn apart. There's nothing we can do about it. After all, they're only cultivators in the second level. It's actually not bad that they could do this. The monkey-faced cultivator sighed. Now that the formation is incomplete, I'm afraid we can only experiment 3 more times. Goddess Zhong glanced at the cultivators inside the eternal world with displeasure and said so. That's not necessarily true. Although the cultivators have suffered some losses, we can find a steady stream of cultivators. After all, don't forget what kind of place this is. The monkey-faced cultivator said with a smile. Hearing this, Goddess Zhong nodded, and her expression became a little better. But it was obvious that she had not completely let go of her disdain for those cultivators. The formation that they taught those cultivators was naturally not the crude and refined formation that the 6th third-level cultivators had set up. This formation was a formation that was slowly permeating and assimilating. According to the principle of this formation, the aura that was attached to the formation would be dispersed to the entire world through the power of the formation itself. Then, with the help of the flow of the world and the formation, the aura would slowly penetrate into the depths of the world and fuse with the laws of the world and the origin of the world. This method was actually not too brilliant. However, it was one of the faster methods to achieve results. If they used other methods, no matter which one it would not be faster than this method. The crude method that the 6 cultivators used naturally did not count. Soon, 3 batches of cultivators were sent into the formation. The 3 groups of cultivators were scattered all over the world. Under their guidance, they set up the formation and gradually activated the aura that had fused with the formation. They worked hard to fuse it with the world and into the depths of the laws of the world. This kind of infiltration wasn't too fast, but it was extremely determined. With the addition of 3 batches of cultivators and 3 formations, the final effect of the infiltration was also quite satisfactory. It seems to be quite effective. Goddess Zhong murmured. Goddess, don't be careless. Don't forget what they looked like at the beginning. The monkey-faced cultivator reminded her. Hearing this, Goddess Zhong's expression changed slightly. She would not forget that the 6 cultivators had been extremely successful in refining the eternal world at the beginning. It even made them a little jealous. The current situation seemed to be going smoothly, but who knew if it would be the same as what happened to the 6 cultivators at the beginning? Then get more cultivators. Goddess Zhong nodded and said directly. Hearing this, the others also showed expressions of agreement. No matter what, they would never step into that world before the final result was revealed. And if they wanted the result to be revealed as soon as possible, they naturally needed more cultivators as cannon fodder. I'll go find them. Among these cultivators, a woman who looked very thin said. Goddess Zhong was overjoyed and said, with fellow Taoist helping, it will definitely be a piece of cake. The woman smiled slightly and greeted them. Her figure flashed and disappeared in front of everyone, heading out of the star wave. After all, the star wave was only one of the unusual scenes on the 2nd level of the Tao Sovereign Path. Although it wasn't insignificant in the entire 2nd level, it wasn't very important either. Under such circumstances, the number of cultivators here was naturally only a very small proportion compared to the entire 2nd level. As a result, if they wanted a large number of cultivators to be cannon fodder, the best choice was, of course, to find them outside of the Tao Sovereign Path. The news that something strange was happening in the star wave had already spread far and wide. Currently, there were quite a few cultivators gathered near and far around the star wave. With a rough estimate, there were more than 1 million of them. Chapter 2050. The thin woman shouted, and an invisible sound wave mixed with chaotic ideas spread out in all directions. In the blink of an eye, it had already enveloped the millions of cultivators around. The cultivators had been paying attention to all the changes in the star wave and were already extremely vigilant. The thin woman's appearance was so incredible that they naturally saw it with their own eyes. However, they did not expect that this woman was a Tao sovereign from the 3rd level and not a cultivator from the 2nd level. They estimated that her strength was far from enough. They did not expect that she would be able to use such a wondrous sound wave to envelop them so easily. What are you doing? Some cultivators exclaimed. The power in their bodies surged and burst out with boundless power to attack the sound wave that enveloped them. At the same time, the millions of cultivators in the surroundings erupted with terrifying power to resist the sound wave. They wanted to completely shatter the effect of the sound wave on them. The power contained in the sound wave itself was nothing. Under the impact of the power continued to collapse. It seemed that the millions of cultivators had won. Alas, these sound waves contained many concepts. These ideas were extremely stubborn. It was impossible to completely get rid of them without experiencing the same impact. Therefore, Even if the sound wave, which was the carrier of these ideas, was crushed, the ideas still existed and still enveloped the millions of cultivators. Under such circumstances, even if the 1 million cultivators escaped from the sound wave, they were still under the control of the thin woman. But they were still under the control of the thin woman. At this moment, the thin woman just smiled slightly. With a wave of his hand, the will that enveloped the many cultivators had already fused with the power that erupted from the cultivators, directly seizing the ownership of the power and using the power of the cultivators themselves to imprison them. The strange changes of the knot caused many cultivators to be horrified. What kind of method is this? How did you seize my power? One by one, the cultivators exclaimed. Their eyes were filled with indescribable horror and confusion. As a cultivator, who could step into the second level of the Tao Master Path? He must have been in existence who had done the 129,600 square meters of the first level of the Tao Master Path. Such an existence had naturally reached an unimaginable depth in their comprehension of laws and control of their own power. For them to have their powers taken away was like an ordinary person suddenly discovering that his body had been taken away. That kind of fear, that kind of bewilderment, it was self-evident. Come with me. There are plenty of benefits here for you. The skinny woman smiled. Her temperament became even more delicate. At that moment, among the million cultivators, thousands of them suddenly let out roars as indescribably loud noises came from their bodies. Terrifying shock waves burst forth from their bodies, completely dispersing the concept contained in the power around them, allowing them to directly break free. There are so many who have grasped that power, the thin woman muttered to herself as her eyes lit up. These cultivators who came from the third level of the Tao Master's path only knew the concept, but did not know why. In their eyes, it was just a kind of magical power. At this very moment, according to the thin woman's senses, the thousands of cultivators who had broken free had obviously also grasped a bit of power. Although it was far inferior to theirs, its nature was somewhat similar. It was with the help of this mysterious power that they were able to break free from the shackles in their bodies. After those cultivators broke free, they did not say a word and turned to leave. In the blink of an eye, they had already disappeared from everyone's senses. He left so quickly. The woman sighed. There was a look of disappointment and pity on her face. Although those cultivators had grasped a bit of the magical power of the concept, it was obvious that their understanding of the concept was not as good as the woman's. The purity of the concept was also tens of thousands of times worse than the woman's. They had obviously paid a huge price to break free from the woman's shackles of the concept. Now, their combat power was negligible. It was precisely because of this that they did not take revenge on the woman after breaking free and instead turned to leave. You don't have to use the Tao Master Prison. Although my methods are rough, I don't want your lives. I just want you to do something that won't cause any loss to you, the thin woman suddenly said. As she spoke, tens of thousands of cultivators had already activated the power of the Tao Master Prison. They were directly grabbed by the Tao Master Prison and disappeared under its shackles. These cultivators were cultivators who would rather break than bend. Even though the woman had said that, it could not change the determination in their hearts. It was only natural. When the number of cultivators increased, there would naturally be different personalities. Among the millions of cultivators, it was extremely easy to find some who would rather break and go to the Tao Master Prison than suffer the slightest grievance. What a pity! The thin woman only sighed. She did not stop those cultivators who had used the power of the Tao Master Prison to break free. In fact, she even took the initiative to release the shackles and let them leave. After all, the power of the Tao Master Prison was not only effective on those cultivators, but it was even more terrifying for her. It seems that you have agreed to cooperate. Then, she turned to look at the others, and the smile on her face became even more gentle. The expressions of the other cultivators were still extremely ugly, and they looked at the thin woman as if they were saws sawing at her body. Although they did not have the courage and determination to use the power of the Tao Master Prison to break free, It did not mean that they had a good impression of the woman. At this moment, their hatred for the woman had not eased at all. If they had the chance to attack, they would definitely not let the woman have an easy time. The thin woman did not care about this at all. She raised her hand and grabbed. In the blink of an eye, the millions of continuous trials had already rapidly gathered towards her palm. In the blink of an eye, they had already condensed into a small world that lay quietly in her palm. After keeping all the cultivators, she thought for a moment and said to herself, although there are already a million cultivators, it seems to be a little insufficient. With that thought, she turned her head and looked around. She began to search for more places where cultivators were gathered. Soon, thus, he confirmed his goal. In an extremely distant crater of the heavens and earth, there were hundreds of thousands of cultivators gathered there, looking at something in the crater. As a cultivator who had also experienced the second level of the Down Master Path, the thin woman naturally knew what the deep pit was. It was none other than a phenomenon similar to the star wave in the second level. She even remembered that she seemed to have entered the deep pit to search for opportunities. "It's you." After confirming her target, she smiled and her figure flickered. She turned into a stream of light and quickly flew towards the deep pit. In an instant, Pina had already crossed countless stars, space-time, and worlds. Countless natural sceneries. In the blink of an eye, she had already arrived near the deep pit. At this moment, there were streams of light flashing in the deep pit, as if a great battle was taking place. It seemed that a large number of cultivators were fighting over something. Oh, so it's already this time. After all, the thin woman had already passed through the deep pit. At a glance, she knew what they were fighting over. The deep pit was full of countless traps. These traps could contain anything: heaven and earth, treasures, space-time, magic treasures, cultivators, and so on. Almost everything could be found. Every once in a while, there would be a change in the deepest part of the deep pit, causing the traps in the deepest part of the deep pit to collapse, causing the various things hidden in the traps to erupt and gush out towards the surface of the deep pit. And every time this happened, it was time for the cultivators to fight over it. At this time, it was obviously the time when the traps broke. I originally thought it would only be a few 100,000, but it seems that the number has increased by more than 10 times. The thin woman's face was full of joy. Originally, she could only see the scene outside the deep pit and thought that there were only hundreds of thousands of cultivators waiting here. Now that she knew the situation inside the deep pit, she naturally realized that there must be 10 times more cultivators in the deep pit than outside. Feeling elated in her heart, she no longer hesitated and also let loose a soft cry. A wave of sound, mixed with her chaotic thoughts, spread in all directions, directly enveloping the hundreds of thousands of cultivators around the crater. The same scene as before appeared once again. Those cultivators broke through the sound wave, but they couldn't break through the shackles of the thoughts. In the end, the thoughts controlled their power and bound their bodies, making it impossible for them to escape. Of course, there were also a very small number of cultivators who paid a huge price to break through the shackles of the thoughts and escape. However, that was only an insignificant portion and didn't have much of an impact on the thin woman's goal. After repeating what she said before, a large portion of the cultivators yielded and were recalled into the space-time above her palm. After cleaning up the cultivators on the outside, she turned her attention to the inside of the pit, to the cultivator's head. I hope fellow Taoist will show mercy. I still have use for the cultivators here. Just at this moment, a voice entered the thin woman's ears. Hearing this voice, the thin woman felt the mysterious power contained within it was not much different from her own. In other words, the use of thoughts. In other words, the person who spoke was at least a cultivator from the third layer like her. She frowned and carefully observed the scene inside the deep pit. In an instant, she was able to distinguish several special points among the millions of cultivators. That place looked as chaotic and dangerous as the other places, but in truth, there was some kind of deep order hidden within. Moreover, she was able to sense the wondrous effects of his concepts that he had purposely revealed. The thin woman weighed the power of the other party and wisely said, "So you are people of the same path. Then I'll leave it to you all, the thin woman said wisely after weighing each other's strength. This deep pit was in existence on the same level as Xinglang. Even Xinglang was targeted by them. It was not strange for this deep pit to be targeted. In fact, it could even be said to be a matter of course. Thank you, fellow Taoist. The cultivator who spoke just now thanked her with a smile. Hearing this, the thin woman only smiled and said take care before turning around and heading toward Xinglang. Although more than 1 million cultivators was still not enough. But if they were used sparingly, that was enough. This was the case for this crater, and it was obviously the same for other anomalies, unless there was nothing of value in those anomalies. If there was nothing of value in those anomalies, there naturally wouldn't be too many cultivators gathered there. In that case, it was naturally impossible to find more cultivators, and the efficiency would be too low if one tried to force it. This was something the thin woman didn't want to do. Since that was the case, it was time to return to Xinglang to complete the mission. An existence like Xinglang wouldn't be much of a hindrance to cultivators from the third layer. Very soon, the skinny woman had already returned to Star Wave and came to the side of the eternal world to see Goddess Zhong. How many cultivators did you gather? Goddess Zhong asked the thin woman when she saw her. Hearing this, the thin woman said with a bit of shame, only 1 million or so. That's a bit too many. Goddess Zhong instantly understood what the skinny woman was trying to say, and she couldn't help but sigh. It can't be helped. Although it's not easy to go against the flow, there are still many cultivators who have mastered it. With so many people, there's no lack of cultivators who have the same ability and the same thoughts as us. Actually, we should be glad that there aren't any of our fellow cultivators involved in this matter in Xinglang. Otherwise, things would be countless times more troublesome, the monkey-faced cultivator said with some relief. Hearing this, the other cultivators nodded in understanding. Their eyes were filled with relief. Goddess Zhong took the time-space from the skinny woman's hand and began to release batches of cultivators. She taught them the formations and passed their auras to them so that they could set up the formations inside the eternal heaven and earth. These cultivators had already submitted, so they were actually relieved when faced with this kind of mission. After all, at the very least, they weren't being sent to die. They were just setting up formations. The safety was much better than they had originally thought. Immediately, batches of cultivators were sent into the sky. Formation after formation appeared in the sky and stacked on top of each other. Of the more than 1 million cultivators, only slightly more than half finished setting up the formations. In other words, there were only about 1 million of them. The remaining cultivators were either directly sent into the world inside the world, or they couldn't find their own location. Some even used the power of the Tao Master's prison to escape when they encountered some danger, because there were just too many formations to set up. Teaching everyone the formations, passing their auras to them, and sending them into the world to set up the formations took as long as 100 years. In other words, it would take 100 years for all the formations to take shape and envelop the entire eternal world. With so many formations stacked on top of each other, the process of injecting the auras of Goddess Zhong and the others into the depths of the world was naturally tens of thousands of times stronger than a single formation. In the next 300 years, the entire eternal world was already faintly emitting the auras of Goddess Zhong and the others. Because of the existence of this aura, the cultivators' feelings towards the eternal world had unknowingly changed. In a trance, it was as if the world was gradually becoming a part of them, an extension of their limbs. On this day, the monkey-like cultivator said to Goddess Zhong, "It went so smoothly. Looks like the experiment is a success." Goddess Zhong looked at him, then at the other cultivators. She could see the eagerness in everyone's eyes. "All right, since we've come to this point, we shouldn't wait any longer. Now, let's enter and truly refine this world." Seeing everyone's reaction, she smiled and said. Hearing this, everyone's eyes lit up, and they immediately said, "It's finally time." Then, they no longer hesitated. Using the connection between themselves and the world, they began to step into the eternal world one by one. They were directly distributed around the world, in the positions they needed to set up the formations. After arriving here, their respective powers and ideas began to communicate, and an extremely wondrous formation gradually took shape. This wondrous formation was not like the tens of thousands of formations that the millions of cultivators had set up before, which had their auras seeped into the world. Instead, the tens of thousands of formations from before were strung together, and the tens of thousands of formations were used as the foundation of the formation, creating a huge formation that was countless times stronger than the original formation. After this huge formation took shape, its ability to seep into the world suddenly increased by countless times. Surging auras frantically poured into the depths of the world, into the laws behind them. At this moment, their connection to the world had increased at a visible rate. In just a few breaths' time, they had completed an improvement that would have taken several years before. Chapter 2051. Goddess Zhong and the others were naturally satisfied, but the cultivators who were forced into the eternal heaven and earth to set up the formation were already in an abyss of fire. Previously, they were separated from each other to set up the formation. Although it was a little humiliating, it was not too painful. They would not suffer any damage because of it. After all, it was only a small formation and one that was under their control. For them, who were at the second level of the Tao Master Path, it was nothing. It could not cause much damage. However, it was different this time. At this time, the control of the entire formation had been seized by Goddess Zhong and the others. Now, they had turned from the original players into chess pieces. The formation that he had set up had also changed from formation that he could control to a meat grinder that he could not control at all. It was a meat grinder that was madly squeezing them at every moment. As a result, the pressure that they had to bear instantly increased by more than 10,000 times. At this time, they felt an unimaginable power being extracted from within their bodies, from their souls. The formation that they had set up seemed to have turned into a shocking beast that was frantically plundering everything that they had. Such bitterness, such pain, caused countless cultivators who were scattered all over the world to howl miserably. There were even many cultivators who could not bear the exhaustion and the hopelessness, and directly activated the means that they had prepared beforehand. They activated the power of the Tao Master's prison and directly used it to escape. Their perseverance all these years turned into a bubble. In the face of such a situation, Goddess Zhong only snorted indifferently and could not be bothered to pay attention to them. This kind of situation was unavoidable. After all, the power of the Tao Master's prison itself was a power that exceeded the limits of their control. Even if they wanted to stop such a power, there was no way they could do it. But they could only let it be. Moreover, the departure of these cultivators. To them, it was not a big loss. After all, the formation had already been formed. Even if they lost the formation, it would not collapse. At most, its strength would be slightly reduced, but it would not affect the final situation much. And so on and so forth. After a few years, the situation finally stabilized. At this moment, the number of cultivators setting up the formation had been reduced by more than 10%. Although the remaining 90% of cultivators weren't the type who would submit to Goddess Zhong's orders, they were still the type who had extremely strong endurance. It could be predicted that if they didn't leave now, they probably wouldn't leave until the end. Goddess Zhong was quite satisfied with this situation. Occasionally, he would sweep his gaze across the crowd of cultivators, and his gaze would be filled with an indescribable disdain towards these cultivators. Her attitude was rather contradictory. To listen to his own arrangements. Her heart was filled with disdain for cultivators who didn't leave at all, thinking that they didn't have any vigor. He didn't have a backbone, so he wasn't worthy of her looking at him differently. As for those cultivators who left, she didn't have a good impression of them. She even thought that they didn't have the ability to bear it, weren't firm enough, and weren't decisive enough. If he wanted to leave, he could have left a long time ago. Why did he wait until now and endure for so many years before failing at the last moment? This view, it also showed that she looked down on the cultivators on the second level of the Tao Master's path. Of course, with such a mentality, Perhaps it existed in the hearts of the majority of cultivators on the third level of the Tao Master's path. 100 years passed in a flash. After 100 years of infiltration at this time, this eternal world, from top to bottom, was already filled with the aura of Goddess Zhong and the others. Just by sensing this world, one would even have the illusion that it was Goddess Zhong and the others. And this world, after so many years of development, had already expanded to more than double its original size. If this world was said to be in existence like the sun in the star wave before, then it had now become the center of the entire star wave, a key hub that could shake the entire star wave. Such an existence hung in the star wave, and its conspicuousness had reached an unimaginable level. Although 1,000,000 cultivators had been wiped out back then, after so many years, hundreds of thousands of cultivators had gathered around the star wave. However, because the 1,000,000 cultivators had been wiped out back then, the cultivators here were no longer gathered together like before. Instead, they used various methods to hide themselves and spread out. It looked like a huge swarm of ants surrounding a huge caterpillar. Among them, there were naturally countless cultivators that had entered the star wave and headed towards this eternal world. However, these cultivators were either captured by Goddess Zhong and the others, or they had seen through the changes that were happening in this world and did not dare to enter this world. Therefore, even with such changes, the number of cultivators in this world was still the same as before, and there wasn't much of a difference from a certain point of view. This had clearly affected Luo Fan's cultivation. However, Luo Fan, who was completely aware of all of this, did not care about any of these changes. On the contrary, he was using the formation of Goddess Zhong and the others to spy on their respective powers, to spy on their usage of ideas, and to spy on the various effects that could improve his cultivation. Under such circumstances, although his cultivation in this world had been disrupted for so many years, but on the whole, their losses weren't that great. On the contrary, because he had spied on the methods of Goddess Zhong and the others, he had gained some understanding of the third level of the Tao Master's path. On this day, Luo Fan's heart jolted and he recovered from his thoughts. Has it already come to this step? It seems that I can see what the tribulation of this world is. He looked at the world around him and sensed the powerful aura that belonged to Goddess Zhong and the others. A look of curiosity appeared on his face. Don't forget, although it was a coincidence that he had constructed this world, his first thought after constructing this world was to investigate the manifestation of the tribulations in this world. The tribulation that erupted from the world that was integrated with the concept of slaughter was the blood tribulation. The tribulation that erupted from the world that was integrated with the concept of chill was the Ice Age. Then, what would the tribulation that erupted from the world that was integrated with the concept of indestructibility be like? To this question, he had always been extremely curious and wanted to know the final result. It was just that the eruption of this kind of tribulation was really irregular, or at least he could not find any pattern at all. Just now, he did not use his own power to adjust it, and did not think of a way to see the eruption of this kind of tribulation as soon as possible. But now, with the efforts of Goddess Zhong and the others, this world could be said to have been suppressed to the limit. If there was a tribulation that was about to erupt, the consequences could be imagined. It must be very close. It was precisely because of this that he had such expectations at this time. It could even be said that it was because he wanted to see what the tribulation was that he had allowed Goddess Zhong and the others to carry out all kinds of plans. Otherwise, even if Goddess Zhong and the others' plans did not cause any harm to this world, he would not let them do as they pleased in this world. Just as this thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, this world began to have an inexplicable change. An unimaginable tremor began to appear everywhere in this world out of thin air. There were countless sources of this tremor, and when all the tremors merged together, the entire world became blurry, causing the countless worlds in this world to shake constantly, as if they were being grabbed by an invisible giant hand. At this moment, Goddess Zhong and the others' expressions changed drastically. What is this? Is this the final counterattack of this world? Such thoughts flashed through their minds. It must be noted that over the years, They had already deeply engraved their own aura into the depths of the laws of this world through the formation, so that this world now completely carried their own aura. This situation, from the perspective of Forge the Universe and the Magic Treasures, was about to reach the end. In other words, this world was about to be completely controlled by them. Under such circumstances, even if it was just a magic treasure, there would inevitably be a counterattack. Even if it was just a magic treasure, there would inevitably be a counterattack. If it was a world that was being refined, there would definitely be a counterattack. There would inevitably be a change similar to a tribulation that would appear to stop this final refinement. Under such circumstances, it was no wonder that they would have such an understanding and feel that this was the retaliation of this world. No matter what kind of counterattack it is, now that we've come this far, it's impossible to give up. Goddess Zhong yelled coldly. Hearing this, the cultivators all looked solemn. Just as Goddess Zhong said, they had spent so much effort and forced so many cultivators to finally reach this step. How could they give up just because of an unknown counterattack? Even if this counterattack could bring them serious harm or even destroy their bodies here, they absolutely had to go to the end and see it to the end. With such a thought in mind, Goddess Zhong and the others no longer had any scruples. They began to activate their power even more crazily, trying to complete the entire refining process as quickly as possible. At this moment, the entire world underwent an extremely subtle change. Bits of strange power began to appear out of thin air in this world, covering all the cultivators in this world and the entire world. This power was extremely strange. Before it appeared, all the cultivators in this world did not know that this power existed in this world. Even after it appeared, the cultivators in this world did not understand how this power appeared. They only knew that in the blink of an eye, this incomparably mysterious power had appeared around them. To them, this mysterious power seemed to have existed in this world since a long time ago. It was so much so that it had already enveloped them since a long time ago. The reason why they did not discover it before was because their senses had been deceived. This feeling was something that neither the cultivators from the third level of the Tao Sovereign Path nor the cultivators from the second level of the Tao Sovereign Path were willing to accept. In this instant, their expressions began to change. They used all kinds of strange methods to test and experiment with this power. They searched for the characteristics of this power, searched for the possible effects this power could have on them, and searched for a way to escape from this power. For a moment, the formation in this world was becoming more and more chaotic. This made it difficult for Goddess Zhong's powerful activation to produce any effect. Instead, there was a faint and inexplicable power that made them feel a little uneasy. Oh no, could it be that this backlash is a retaliation? Goddess Zhong and the others had an inexplicable fear in their eyes. The retaliation of the heavens and earth could appear in any form. Even this kind of retaliation was not impossible. However, if it was really this kind of backlash, then they would be in some trouble. After all, in the process of their auras merging with the world through the formation, they had also deeply integrated with the formation. This deep integration, this made the formation almost like a part of their bodies. In this way, if the formation were to backfire, it would be equivalent to a part of their bodies betraying them. The terrifying consequences would be self-evident. Perhaps we should consider abandoning this body. This thought emerged in the minds of Goddess Zhong, the monkey-like cultivator, and the others. Before they could make a decision, the power that permeated the world suddenly began to take effect. These effects did not exist in the void that belonged to this world, but in the countless worlds in this world. Those worlds that combined the countless concepts in Luo Fan's worldview were already incomparably perfect worlds, even though the environments were different. Although the environment was different, their own laws were almost completely different. However, in every world, there was a complete ecosystem. There was a complete civilization structure. In other words, in any world, there would be countless living beings. And at that moment, in each of the worlds, more and more chaos appeared. After the power merged with it, a strange living being was gradually being modified. That's right, it was not being born, but being modified. Modified from the living beings that originally existed in that world. These modified living beings behaved differently in every world. Every world had its own unique characteristics, but they all had one thing in common: an extremely terrifying similarity. Indestructible. For example, an extremely ordinary living being. In a world without the existence of extraordinary power, an extremely ordinary living being would die after being modified by that power. Then they would lose their rationality and come back to life with only their instincts left. They would begin to kill their own kind, transform their original kind into their current kind, and then continue to kill. This kind of living being often appeared in various literary works. They were zombies. This was only the most ordinary of appearances in a world without extraordinary power. In a world with extraordinary power, these transformed undead creatures would only be stronger and more terrifying. For example, in a world that had already given birth to a normal cultivation civilization, under the modification of that power, a kind of demonic soul would be transformed from a cultivator. This kind of demonic soul had completely lost its rationality and was left with only various instincts. And they were also unbelievably contagious. Any living being that came into contact with this kind of demonic soul would quickly be transformed into a demonic soul and similarly become unimaginably contagious. Every world in this part of the eternal world was the same. In every world, there was a similar disaster erupting. In just a few short months, every world in this eternal realm had turned into the end of the world. Originally prosperous civilizations were all destroyed, and all of them eventually turned into the same kind of civilization, a civilization of the end of the world. An unimaginable resentment and killing intent erupted from each of those worlds. The light emitted by these worlds grew dimmer and dimmer because of this change. In the end, they turned into dead stars that hung dimly in the void. So, this is the tribulation of indestructibility. Luo Fan came to a sudden realization as he watched all of this. Didn't all the tribulations in these worlds originate from indestructibility? It was precisely because those who should have died were unwilling to die that all sorts of terrifying living beings were born. And that was why such a terrifying world of the end of the world was born. If there were such terrifying changes in these worlds, then the situation in the void outside of these worlds wasn't much better. In fact, because these countless cultivators were connected by formations, the changes were even more severe and tragic than in the other worlds. Although the power of the living beings in those worlds was far inferior to that of the many cultivators in the void outside, because they were independent from each other, a large number of living beings still survived in the end. They fought against the creatures that caused the end of the world and did their best to maintain the vitality of the world. Outside of this world, all the living beings in the void, including Goddess Zhong and the others, had been infected by that power and were transforming into indestructible creatures that had lost all sense of reason. Chapter 2052. As he roared, the cultivator's eyes turned white and his life source changed. A blood-red light radiated from his body and instantly began to spread along the connection of the formation towards the millions of cultivators in the formation. It was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. The cultivators who were already struggling bitterly began to be assimilated by that power. They lost their reason and turned into living beings that only knew how to kill and only knew how to kill. This is bad. We have to escape from this world as soon as possible. Goddess Zhong let out a loud cry. She ignored the connection between herself and the rune, ignored the connection between herself and this world, and brazenly severed all connections between herself and the outside world. As her power surged, she charged out of the eternal world. There were many cultivators who did the same thing as her. The monkey-faced cultivator, the thin woman, and the other cultivators from the third level all did the same thing without any regard for their own safety. Puff, 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 puff. Blood gushed out of their pores in an instant. The scene was unimaginably tragic. However, these cultivators completely disregarded all of this and tried their best to rush out of this world and escape from the star wave. At this moment, in their eyes, this part of the world was like hell in the eyes of ordinary people. It was incomparably dangerous and sinister. If they stayed here for even a little longer, it meant that their lifespan was reaching its limit. However, just as they were about to rush out of this part of the world, an indescribable force appeared out of thin air and acted on their bodies, pulling them back abruptly. Instead, they collided with the various blood-colored lights that were crazily spreading towards them at an even faster speed. This is bad. Our connection with this world is too close. Even if we cut it off like this, we can't completely cut it off. At this moment, they all cried bitterly in their hearts. Originally, they had worked hard to brand this world with their own aura, but now they realized that they had indeed succeeded in doing so. This kind of imprint was indeed successful, but after this success, it had instead become their shackles. It had become their noose, causing them to constantly move towards destruction and extinction. The speed at which the blood-red lights swept over was too fast, and the speed at which they were pulled back was too shocking. Therefore, they were completely enveloped by the power of the Tao Sovereign Prison before they could even activate it. With the support of external forces, the power that had been eroding their willpower in their bodies finally suppressed their rationality and all their resistance. It turned them into mindless monsters that only had the instinct to kill and devour. The roar instantly swept through the entire void. These monsters began to fight and devour each other crazily in the void. Even though Goddess Zhong and the others were much stronger than the other cultivators of the second level, they had already lost their rationality. Their greatest advantage over the cultivators of the second level, which was their ability to use their thoughts, was not effective. Therefore, even though they appeared to be much stronger than the other cultivators, however, in the end, he was unable to be as absolute as he normally was. He was unable to completely ignore the terrifying alliance of all the other cultivators. At most, there would only be 100 second-layer cultivators working together. He would be able to fight against them. In this way, the situation would naturally not be as one-sided as he had imagined. After those cultivators lost their rationality, their instincts were strengthened, and their understanding of the strong and the weak deepened. Facing Goddess Zhong and the others, who were over 100 times stronger than other living beings, they naturally began to work together. In the end, the situation became even, and the slaughter became even more intense, causing the void to be filled with chaos. The void turned into an indescribable Azura hell. Such a scene was seen by Luo Fan. However, he could only sigh inwardly. What a tragic fate. Fortunately, I am the creator of this world. Otherwise, even I would have been affected. As he thought of this, the pity in his eyes deepened. The battle between these cultivators and the void affected the countless worlds in the entire world, causing the operation of those worlds to be disrupted. And the chaos in the operation of these worlds caused the operation of the eternal heaven and earth itself to become chaotic. The original state of balance with the star wave in the outside world was gradually disrupted. This situation, in the eyes of the outside world, was like the huge sun in the star wave had begun to distort. Countless rays of light began to shoot out from the sun, and in the blink of an eye, they returned to the sun and continued to disrupt the other worlds in the star wave, causing the star wave to become even more violent and chaotic. The star wave is going to be destroyed. At this moment, the cultivators around the star wave all had the same thought. With this thought in mind, the cultivators who knew each other looked at each other, and most of them turned around and walked into the distance, wanting to get away from the star wave. Of course, there were those who left, and naturally, there were those who chose to do the opposite. After all, the destruction of the star wave represented great danger, but it also represented a great opportunity. The star wave had existed in the second layer of the Tao Master's path for countless years. Although there had always been various changes, it had never been destroyed. But now, it was suddenly about to be destroyed, which meant that a shocking upheaval was about to occur. It meant that they were about to obtain something that they had not been able to obtain before. For cultivators who were willing to take risks, How could they give up on such an opportunity? Some of the cultivators who stayed behind began to set up various arrangements around the star wave, intending to intercept certain things after the star wave was destroyed. Some fearlessly charged into the star wave, wanting to obtain the corresponding treasures from within before the star wave was destroyed. Outside the star wave, it was already like this, and the changes inside the star wave were even more intense. Because of this, the entire star wave had been affected by the eternal world. All sorts of indescribable destructive fluctuations swept through the entire space-time inside the star wave, causing changes to occur in every corner of the star wave. There were worlds that had not originally been subject to a tribulation. Suddenly, a tribulation descended from the sky, sweeping away all living beings in the world in an extremely violent manner, as if the world had experienced an entire lifetime. It began to move towards destruction. No one knew how many living beings died in the process. No one knew how many cultivators had been deceived and resented the heavens and earth. The power of the Tao Master's prison began to continuously appear inside the star wave, capturing one cultivator after another. They were thrown into the Tao Master's prison. In just a few breaths' time, the number of times the power of the Tao Master's prison had descended was comparable to the total number of times it had descended in the past hundreds of millions of years. Damn it, I was so close to getting it. No one knew how many cultivators who were wrapped up in the power of the Tao Master's prison roared. However, no matter how much they roared, they could not change the fact that they had failed at the last step. Parts of the star wave continued to collapse in the process. The various concepts and treasures in the star wave were constantly released during the process. During this process, it was constantly released and spread in all directions along with the destructive fluctuations that existed within the starry waves. Some even broke through the starry waves and arrived in the void outside, where they were intercepted by the cultivators. Of course, there were cultivators who successfully intercepted these treasures and obtained unimaginably huge rewards. However, there were also cultivators who misjudged the power of these treasures and ended up going for wool and coming home shorn. Even their own bodies could not withstand the impact. Even their bodies were shattered and their consciousness perished. This change caused the eyes of many cultivators who had stopped outside the star wave to turn red. Such treasures. It was such a risk, but it was enough to make them fanatic. In an instant, more and more cultivators began to gather from all over the second level of the Tao Master's path, causing the number of cultivators around the star wave to increase. As a result, more and more cultivators were unable to withstand the impact and died in the process of intercepting the treasures. The entire second level of the Tao Master's path was immersed in an increasingly fanatical atmosphere. The cultivators at the other locations of the phenomenon also began to leave after hearing the news. They were all heading here. 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, 1 billion, 10 billion. In the end, in just a few days, the number of cultivators around the star wave had exceeded 10 billion. Such a large number of cultivators was not considered much in the second level of the Tao Master's path. It was not insignificant, but it definitely did not make up much of a proportion. However, it was unprecedented for so many cultivators to gather around the star wave at the same time. No matter how old a cultivator was, they had never seen such a scene before. They had never seen so many cultivators gathered around a certain phenomenon. It seems that a war that affects the entire second level is about to break out. A wise cultivator sighed to himself at this moment. With so many cultivators here, no matter how many treasures there were in the star wave, there would not be enough to distribute. And in this fanatical atmosphere, how could the cultivators who did not obtain any treasures accept their fate? Since they did not accept their fate, they would naturally snatch it. If they snatched it, there would naturally be a war. And once the war began, the final result would not be something that anyone could stop. The final war would definitely affect the entire second level of the Tao Master's path. It would definitely involve all the cultivators in the second level. The intensity of the slaughter would definitely reach a level that no living being could imagine. It was already foreseeable that blood would soar into the sky. Perhaps only other abnormal scenes would be able to avoid the effects of the war. However, although there were wise cultivators who saw through all this, they were not willing to give up such an opportunity. They were not willing to hide in other abnormal scenes. After all, the destruction of an abnormal scene was a huge opportunity. The treasures that could be obtained from it were so precious that it was unimaginable in the past. According to ancient legends, there were even treasures that could directly improve the Tao Master's path by several levels. Under such circumstances, as long as a cultivator had the courage, they would not give up. How could they stay out of it just because of the risk and the war? The changes in the star wave became more and more intense and terrifying. The various impacts and changes in the eternal heaven and earth had completely changed the shape of the eternal heaven and earth. It was as if it had turned into a puddle of mud, constantly devouring the star wave and releasing all kinds of destructive auras, this kind of upheaval. Even Luo Fan felt a chill in his heart when he saw this. The influence of the eternal heaven and earth is actually so terrifying. Even the heaven and earth itself has obtained this kind of influence. If there is no external force to restrict it, I'm afraid that the star wave will really be completely destroyed. At this time, such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and his expression became solemn. However, in the depths of this solemn expression, there was an inexplicable excitement hidden in it. Perhaps there will be an unexpected change, he murmured with an indescribable expectation in his heart. The countless worlds that existed in this part of the eternal heaven and earth were all integrated with the concept of the world of laws, and they were extremely pure. There was no impurity in them at all. Under such circumstances, without the power of the same level of concept, it was impossible to destroy them. Therefore, even though the countless living beings in the void outside those worlds were engaged in an incomparably tragic slaughter, messing up the operating laws of those worlds into a mess, not a single one of those worlds would be destroyed because of this. The result of messing up the operating laws of those worlds was the release of various destructive auras, causing the eternal heaven and earth to start spreading in all directions and gradually infecting the star wave itself. The eternal heaven and earth itself was already incomparably huge, and under this kind of change, the surrounding heavens and earth began to collide with it. And every world that collided with the eternal heaven and earth was like Mars colliding with Earth. Earth-shaking tremors were produced. Both of them were suffering from shocking destruction at the same time. However, just the difference in size alone was enough for the eternal heaven and earth to easily crush the other worlds, causing the worlds that collided with the eternal heaven and earth to completely collapse. Everything within them was completely thrown out and then pushed by the fluctuations of the star wave, either towards the outside of the star wave or directly colliding with the star wave. The eternal heaven and earth itself, on the other hand, only suffered some damage that was neither too big nor too small, and coupled with the concept of indestructibility that had been fused with the eternal heaven and earth. This caused the damage suffered by the eternal heaven and earth to recover at an unimaginable speed, and even the other side of the world hadn't completely collapsed yet. His body had already completely recovered. Just like this, more and more worlds collapsed. The chaos and destruction within the star wave grew stronger and stronger, and more terrifying as the eternal heaven and earth collapsed. This, however, was extremely good news for the cultivators waiting outside the star wave, because the more worlds were destroyed, the more treasures they could receive from the outside, and the more benefits they could obtain. In fact, to the cultivators who had already plunged into the star wave and started searching for treasures, this was also extremely good news, because even though this made the environment inside the star wave even more dangerous, it also meant that their chances of obtaining treasures had become even greater. After all, there were only a few treasures that rushed out of the star wave. During this process, countless cultivators lost their lives to the shockwaves produced by the destruction of the world, but at the same time, countless cultivators obtained enough treasures during this process, and all of them were so excited that their eyes turned red. What a cruel party! Luo Fan sighed inwardly as he watched all of this. At this moment, he was still at the center of the eternal heaven and earth. The entire eternal heaven and earth had become indescribably chaotic at this moment, but the center wasn't affected by the chaos at all. It was as calm as the eye of a tornado. Of course, this didn't mean that he didn't feel any pressure here. On the contrary, the pressure he felt here wasn't something that any other place could compare to, because the chaos in this part of the world had already surpassed a certain limit. If he wasn't here to suppress this place, the eternal heaven and earth would definitely collapse. After all, this part of the eternal heaven and earth was currently fighting against the entire star wave. Even if the star wave's power was dispersed, it was still an unimaginably colossus. The might, power, and concept contained within it all far surpassed the eternal heaven and earth. Under these circumstances, every time the eternal heaven and earth resisted the star wave, it would suffer an incredibly powerful backlash. If no one guided this backlash, it would definitely accumulate in this part of the world, and at some point in time, it would definitely tear this part of the world into pieces and completely crush the concept of indestructibility contained within it. And Luo Fan's role here was to suppress this part of the world and guide the backlash it endured, so that this part of the eternal heaven and earth could gain the upper hand in the battle against the star wave. Of course, right now, he was just borrowing the star wave's power to fight back. During the entire process of guiding, he was only using his own control over the eternal heaven and earth to divert the various backlash's power. He wasn't using his own body to directly resist that kind of power. If he could do this, why would he need to seek comprehension and fortuitous encounters in this star wave? Although the manifestation of the tribulations in this star wave was closely related to the world itself, the methods were also different. However, in the end, it still relied on absorbing the power, concept, and various other things from the star wave. Chapter 2053. The Carnival of War soon intensified. Phoenix Phoenix quick update, please search. When the first cultivator couldn't bear it any longer and attacked another cultivator to seize the treasures he had obtained, the horn for the celebration had already been blown. The battle began to spread rapidly. In the beginning, the battle was limited to the cultivators who were fighting for the treasures. However, as time passed and the scale of the battle grew, the conflicts between the cultivators finally erupted and the battle began to spread endlessly. A few days later, the battle had spread to the billions of living beings in the surroundings. The reason for the battle was no longer the treasures that had been shot out from a star wave, but the various grudges and karma of the past. In the end, no one could stop this war anymore. Fortunately, these cultivators placed great importance on their own lives, and most of them had already made preparations elsewhere. Once something went wrong, they would immediately activate their own preparations and draw the power of the Tao Sovereign's prison, allowing them to escape the fate of certain death through the Tao Sovereign's prison. Therefore, even though the war was in full swing and the scale was growing larger and larger, the number of cultivators who died in the war was still small. It was not enough to make the second layer of the Tao Sovereign's road become empty because of this huge war, of course. Although they did not die, they were still captured by the Tao Sovereign's prison. It was not something that could be done in a short period of time. Therefore, it could be expected that the second level of the Tao Master's Road would be much emptier than before for a period of time after this war. Tens of billions of powerful cultivators were engaged in a fierce battle. It was impossible for the fluctuations and effects of the battle to not cause changes to the second level of the Tao Sovereign's path. In fact, a strange scene that had never appeared in the second level of the Tao Sovereign's prison was gradually taking shape in the battle. The strange scene was not stable in a short period of time, and one could only see its rough outline. It was a boundless sand field, or rather a battlefield. In this battlefield, at every moment, there were countless lights, countless powers, countless mysterious divine abilities, and countless unimaginable magical treasures fighting each other in this phenomenon. It happened to be in the vicinity of the star wave. As the waves of destruction emitted by the star wave continued to spread in all directions, the area it occupied began to increase. In the end, It turned into a behemoth that occupied a large part of the second level of the Tao Master's Road. It was predictable. If this strange landscape was finally formed, it might become another way to pass through the second level of the Tao Master's path, or perhaps he could replace Xinglang, who was walking towards destruction, and become Xinglang's identity to pass the second level of the Tao Master's path. However, this could only be seen from a macroscopic perspective. For the numerous cultivators who were fighting and killing in that area, the phenomenon and the way to pass the second level of the Tao Master's path were all illusory. For them, the most important thing right now was their opponent. They were their enemies. It was the powerful cultivator who was attacking them. Apart from this, everything else was illusory. In fact, perhaps it was because of this mentality that the outline of the phenomenon appeared. After all, the phenomenon was born from the second level of the Tao Master's path. It could be said that it was a mark deeply engraved on the Tao Master's path. How could it be so easy to leave behind such a scene? If one did not have such a wholehearted mentality, how could they have done it? Everything that happened in the outside world was secondary to the cultivators in the star wave. There were endless worlds in the star wave, and in these worlds, there were also countless living beings and countless cultivators. Since ancient times, countless cultivators had entered the star wave to comprehend the mysteries of the star wave and seize the treasures that might be brewing in the star wave. Under such circumstances, the number of cultivators in the star wave that belonged to the second level of the Tao Master's path was unimaginable. At this time, as more and more worlds in the star wave are destroyed by the tribulations of the eternal world, more and more cultivators left the world. They appeared in the star wave. After these cultivators appeared here, they were all terrified and panicked. They couldn't understand the changes caused by the star wave. They didn't even have time to think about the reason for all of this. They could only wholeheartedly resist the drastic changes of the star wave and resist the danger it brought to their lives. Many cultivators had no choice but to activate their own preparations in order to receive the power of the Tao Master's prison and take themselves away. There were even more cultivators who did not have time to do this before they were melted by the changes in the star wave. Their bodies were completely destroyed, and at most, only a few imprints were left. They were either sent out of the star wave, or through various transformations, they were thrown into the eternal world and became part of the tribulations of the eternal world, pushing the tribulations of the eternal world towards an even more tragic direction. The chaos in the star wave stirred up all sorts of mysteries hidden in the depths of the star wave. The treasures that would normally only appear after many years appeared one by one. They were either devoured, destroyed, or directly sent out of the star wave. From the outside, it looked like specks of brilliance had appeared out of thin air. They were either extinguished, turned into streams of light that were thrown into the eternal world, or turned into streams of light that charged out of the star wave and into the increasingly tragic battlefield in the outside world. Amidst this, an existence that Luo Fan had always wanted to comprehend appeared. That was the wisp of primal chaos that was hidden within the star wave. This strand of chaos mysteries was formless and intangible. It was an illusory existence that was difficult to find and control. It was hidden behind the star wave, or rather, it was a manifestation of the structure of the star wave itself. At this moment, the star wave had become so chaotic that it was even moving towards destruction. However, it had gradually destroyed the foundation of this mysterious existence, causing it to have no choice but to reveal itself. Even if it was the power of a connate, golden immortal realm cultivator, it would become a living being if it broke free from its control and obtained freedom. Although this strand of chaos mysteries wasn't power, its level was trillions of times higher than the power of a connate, golden immortal realm cultivator. Naturally, it wouldn't be like an inanimate object that couldn't resist its own destruction. This strand of chaos itself actually contained some sort of instinct that was similar to intelligence. Under the urging of this instinct, this strand of profound mysteries was absolutely not willing to disappear just like this. It was impossible for it to be willing to perish along with the destruction of the star wave. That was why at the last moment, when the star wave was about to lose its foundation, it was truly revealed. An unintentional willow grows. At this moment, Luo Fan, who was suppressing the eternal world at the center of the eternal world, had a thought, and a smile appeared on his face. At this moment, he directly simulated his comprehension of this strand of chaos mysteries, causing the eternal world to undergo some sort of extremely subtle change. At the instant this change appeared, the shapeless and immaterial strand of chaos shook and suddenly turned from the depths of the star wave to the eternal world. It turned towards the bit of comprehension that Luo Fan simulated at this moment. It went without saying how difficult it was to change the eternal heaven and earth and affect the eternal heaven and earth when the eternal heaven and earth were in a state of eternal tribulation. Even if Luo Fan was the creator of this world, it was absolutely impossible for him to have an easy time, let alone for a long time. In other words, if there was no external force, then the final result of his modification of the world and his comprehension of the strand of chaos mysteries would be that this change would be swiftly erased under the tribulation of the eternal world itself. It was even to the extent that the intensification of this change would cause the tribulation of this world to become even more violent, and in the end, it would cause even more cruel consequences. However, obviously, such a situation wouldn't occur at this moment, because an external force had appeared. The strand of chaos mysteries was that external force. Moreover, it was an external force that was absolutely powerful enough to reverse and change everything. The injection of this external force instantly caused the minute modifications that Luo Fan had made to this world to completely stabilize. In fact, it even developed a step further. From what was originally only a rough simulation by Luo Fan, it became deeper and deeper, gradually replicating the strand of chaos mysteries completely. It became deeper and deeper, gradually replicating the mysteries of primal chaos, causing the eternal heaven and earth to undergo subtle changes. The strand of chaos mysteries was outside the world, in other words, within the star wave. It couldn't resist the influence of the eternal tribulation at all, and it couldn't stabilize the overall environment of the star wave. It should have been similar in the eternal heaven and earth. In other words, under normal circumstances, even if the strand of chaos mysteries had been injected into the eternal world, it would have gradually disappeared due to the destruction of the environment under the tribulation. In the end, it would gradually be destroyed. However, all of this was different because of Luo Fan's existence. For Luo Fan, since he discovered the strand of chaos mysteries in the star wave, almost all of his plans were to come into contact with them and comprehend them. For this, he didn't even hesitate to trigger the tribulations of the world. When the strand of chaos mysteries had appeared in front of him and entered the eternal world that had been born because of him, how could he just let the strand of chaos mysteries disappear just like that? Therefore, at this time, he was doing his best to guide the power of the eternal world itself and do his best to prevent it from destroying the environment of the strand of chaos mysteries. He did his best to preserve the foundation of the strand of chaos mysteries. Fortunately, he was the creator of the eternal world. The concept of indestructibility that formed the eternal world came from him. Otherwise, like an ant trying to shake a tree, his methods would have probably left him riddled with holes in the end. In reality, even so, he was constantly retreating at this time. He had no choice but to let more and more of the environment pass by. The area of the environment shrank and shrank continuously in order to reduce the pressure he had to endure from the world and the tribulations. In the end, he shrunk the surroundings to a few meters around him, which was the center of the eternal world. Only then did he barely manage to resist the tribulation and the pressure of the heavens and the earth, and preserve the profundities of the chaos. This was obviously where his true body was. The reason why this place could maintain this environment and resist the pressure of the world outside and the pressure of the tribulations was because it had never been invaded by tribulations. This was the only pure land in the entire world. or rather, the only pure land in the entire starwave. I've actually managed to capture this strand of mystery. When the pressure finally stabilized, Luo Fan suddenly felt an indescribable joy in his heart. At this moment, the center of the world where he was had turned into a state of chaos. It looked like it had turned into an egg of chaos. Luo Fan, who sat quietly in the center, seemed to have transformed into Pangu, as if he was waiting for an opportunity to split open the egg of chaos and split the world apart. The strand of chaos mysteries that originally existed in the endless starwave had been compressed into an area that was only a few dozen feet wide. Naturally, the chaos mysteries could not be hidden in the endless starwave like before. Instead, they were directly revealed in front of him, lying there quietly, showing him the endless truths and mysteries contained within them. At this time, Luo Fan no longer cared about anything else. What would happen to the eternal world? What would happen to the eternal world? What would happen to the starwave? What would happen outside the starwave? What would happen to the road of Down Master? To him, all of these were far inferior to any change in the strand of chaos mysteries in front of him. With this understanding, he directly withdrew his perception that was paying attention to the outside world and completely focused on the strand of chaos mysteries in front of him. He began to feel the endless information that was transmitted from it. This information was extremely mysterious, marvelous beyond marvelous. Not only was it incomparably obscure and complicated, it was also constantly changing. At this moment, it looked like this, and at the next moment, without warning, it would immediately undergo earth-shaking changes and become completely different from before. Luo Fan was already very familiar with this situation. At this time, his worldview naturally emerged on the surface of his body. It looked like he was wearing an invisible armor covered with stars out of thin air. The number of starlight spots on the invisible armor was much greater than before, and it was also much brighter. There were countless nebulae that were taking shape, but not yet fully formed. Every bright spot was swimming all the time, and the way in which every bright spot was swimming contained endless truths and endless cultivation mysteries. It was even enough for any cultivator who had stepped into the second level of the road of Down Master to comprehend some kind of profound cultivation way. It could be said that, if the image of this invisible armor were to be leaked, it would be enough for the cultivators at the second level of the road of Down Master to treat it as a treasure and start a bloody fight for it. At this time, as Luo Fan's mind was immersed in the endless information revealed by the chaotic mystery, bits of light began to appear on his body. They quickly gathered and formed a vague bright spot. It was like a nebula condensing into a star. Then, the bright spot quickly collapsed and turned back into bright light. A large part of the bright spot began to dissipate and became dim, looking like a star that had collapsed. Then, another bright spot was produced and condensed on top of the previous bright spot, causing the brightness of the bright spot to increase to a certain limit. It continued to condense and turn into another bright spot. Then, the bright spot collapsed again. Just like that, a never-ending cycle was started. Every time such a cycle occurred, some bright spot would remain. Finally, after a certain amount of light had gathered, it would turn into a bright spot that would never collapse. It would be integrated into the bright spot operating system on the surface of the invisible armor that was beyond the limit of description, making the bright spot operating system even more complicated and incredible. In this process, time gradually passed. 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. In a trance, it seemed that tens of millions of years had passed. On this day, Luo Fan suddenly trembled. He suddenly felt an indescribable sense of relaxation and contentment from the bottom of his heart. In this relaxation and contentment, all kinds of pressure that had been pressing on his body and heart suddenly disappeared into thin air. What's going on? He, who had been immersed in the understanding of the chaotic mystery, was at a loss for all these changes. He did not know what was going on, nor did he know what caused it. At this moment, He felt that the chaotic and mysterious existence's basic environment that was originally restrained within a radius of several dozen feet around him had started to expand wildly in all directions. The speed at which it expanded was so fast that it almost surpassed his will. In just a flash, it had already covered everything that he could sense. At the same time, an indescribable glow descended from the sky, enveloping the entire area that the environment had expanded to, causing the originally dusky environment to become overflowing with light. It was indescribably gorgeous and sacred. "This is my eternal world." In a moment of shock, Luo Fan had already understood where he was. This was the eternal world that Luo Fan had been suppressing all this time. The eternal world that was born because of the concept of indestructibility that he had injected into it. Chapter 2054. As the light shone, an indescribable feeling of sublimation appeared in his heart. In a trance, he felt that his mind was constantly expanding and growing. In the blink of an eye, it had already enveloped the entire eternal world. Just as his mind completely enveloped the entire eternal world, a feeling of disbelief emerged in his heart. "It's actually this kind of change," he murmured as his eyes flickered slightly. At this moment, outside the eternal world, there was no longer star wave, no longer chaos, nor was there an aura of destruction or tribulation. There was only a boundless void, as well as an unknown number of cultivators watching from afar. Further out, there were all sorts of strange sceneries and lands on the second level of the Tao's sovereign path. As for the eternal world itself, it had already grown countless times larger. Just from its size and scale alone, it wasn't any smaller than Xinglang from back then. This situation was that the eternal world had already replaced Starwave and had become a strange sight on the second level of the Tao sovereign path. It had become a way for cultivators on the second level to transcend the second level and step into the third level. In particular, at this moment, the eternal world was enveloped by the unimaginable light. The connection between the eternal world and the second level of the Tao sovereign path was gathering and strengthening. Vaguely, there seemed to be some kind of indescribable channel being established between this world and the second level of the Tao sovereign path. It made the two inseparable, and the various mysterious existences between the two were communicating with each other, circulating. This situation made him even more certain that the eternal world had already replaced Starwave. This was a change in the status of the eternal world, but the change inside the eternal world was even greater. At this moment, Goddess Zhong and the others had already disappeared without a trace inside the eternal world. Even the cultivators on the second level of the Tao sovereign path that they had captured were nowhere to be found. They could no longer be found. Even the traces of battle and slaughter left behind by them had vanished into nothingness at this moment. Not a single trace was left behind. It was as if there had never been a battle here. In contrast, the countless worlds inside the eternal world had become different from before. The levels of these worlds had passed through that tribulation. However, both of them had already undergone astonishing improvements. Now, those worlds were simply like the eternal world from back then. The void of the eternal world seemed to have no rules at all. At the same time, it seemed to be moving according to some kind of deep pattern. Furthermore, the scenes in these worlds were different for every world, or rather, every heaven and earth. Some worlds were still in the process of rebuilding after the calamity, while others had already developed civilizations that were completely different from before the calamity. Some suffered heavy injuries, while others soared into the sky. Among them, Luo Fan even saw countless cultivators who should have been on the second level of the Tao Master's path had completely integrated into these worlds. To become an inseparable part of that world, to become a gear in the cycle of reincarnation of these worlds. The original concepts contained in these worlds had become existences like the great ways of these worlds. The many magical effects of these concepts had been perfectly integrated into every aspect of the world. Every magical effect had been greatly developed in the operation of the world. Even though Luo Fan had only glanced at it at this time, he could already feel the inexplicable stimulation of his world view contained in it. He faintly felt that his worldview seemed to be absorbing some kind of nutrition to brew a deeper change. Such a situation caused him to suddenly realize that this was a great opportunity for him. However, it is said that one can leave the second level of the Tao Master's path and step into the third level after passing through a certain unusual landscape. Suddenly, this piece of information that he had heard from a cultivator on the third level of the Tao Master's path suddenly emerged in his mind. With this thought, he suddenly felt an inexplicable and strange feeling in his heart. This strange feeling was none other than a staircase, a path. This path was simply invisible. If one looked at it from a normal point of view, it was impossible to determine whether it really existed or was just an illusion. However, Luo Fan, who had sensed this ladder and path, clearly knew that it was real. Moreover, it was precisely because of the thought that he had just had that the ladder and path to the third level of the Tao Master's path was created. As long as he was willing, he could step on that ladder at any time and through that path, leave the second level of the Tao Master's path, and step into the third level of the Tao Master's path. At the moment when he had this enlightenment, another strange feeling emerged in his heart. "This is my fifth tribulation," he murmured, feeling the pressure from an unknown distance. Such a thought emerged in his mind. However, that strange feeling was exactly what he had sensed many times before. It was the feeling that the great calamity was about to befall him. It is indeed the Tao Master's path. In such a short time, I have actually sensed the existence of the tribulation again. Luo Fan could not help but murmur at this time. After all, it had only been tens of millions of years since he had passed through the fourth tribulation. This period of time might be extremely long in the eyes of mortals, but for a cultivator like him, it was not even the blink of an eye. If he could make a little progress in such a short time, it would be enough to make a cultivator at his level unable to contain his joy. But now, in such a short time after passing through the fourth tribulation, his cultivation realm had already grown to the point where he could sense the fifth tribulation. This progress was more than several times stronger. This speed was so fast. Even he could not help but feel like he was in a dream. Of course, right now, he could only faintly sense the existence of the fifth great tribulation. As for when the fifth great tribulation would descend, how much danger it would bring him, and whether it would be as unbearable as the fourth great tribulation, he had no way of knowing at this point in time. Only when his cultivation level increased in the future would he be able to sense this clearly, although he was shocked by his speed of progress. But after all, Luo Fan was still Luo Fan. With just a little thought, he already understood why he could progress so quickly. After passing through the fourth tribulation, he had already stepped into the second level of the Tao Master's path. After that, he immersed himself in the star wave and began to use the heaven and earth within to comprehend the most fundamental point of chaos within the star wave. After that, he even comprehended the application of concepts through the heaven and earth that almost allowed him to be reborn. In this way, it will be strange if his progress was small. Although it was a little fast to be able to sense the existence of the fifth tribulation so quickly, but in fact, it was just a matter of time. After understanding this, Luo Fan's expression became calm again. With a slight thought, he directly swept the feeling of the stairs and the path directly into the depths of his heart. Now, the eternal world replaced the star wave and became the strange landscape of the second level of the Tao Master's path. This was a great opportunity for him. He could integrate himself into the many worlds, and the ideas in the many worlds would be more diverse and mysterious. In the end, it could bring him an unimaginable understanding. How could he give it up just to set foot on the third level of the Tao Master's path? Don't forget, the practitioners of the third level of the Tao Master's path would sneak back here from time to time. At this moment, the glow that covered the entire eternal world began to gradually converge. After a while, all the glow had completely disappeared. The entire eternal world had truly integrated with the second level of the Tao Master's path. Luo Fan could faintly sense that the imperishable heaven and earth had already become a part of an even more vast and inconceivable cycle. At every moment, there were endless mysteries, infinite information, and infinite principles that flowed into this world in a way that he could not understand, and then flowed out in an equally incomprehensible way to join the huge cycle outside of this world. Faintly, in the huge cycle, there were hundreds of similar existences that echoed with the eternal world. Beneath these hundreds of similar existences, there were even more vast existences that were hidden like underwater glaciers. There were inexplicable existences that were faintly connected to the eternal world. Are those the higher-level Tao Master's path, or the mysteries hidden behind the second level? This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Even if Luo Fan could slightly sense the more vast existences hidden behind it, he would feel as if he was bearing a heavy burden. It was as if he was not qualified to come into contact with and feel that kind of existence. If this feeling came from the higher-level Tao Master's path, he could accept it. After all, it was the Tao Master's path opened by an existence at the true saint level. There were mysteries that he could not imagine or understand. This was a matter of course. However, if this was the mystery behind the second level of the Tao Master's path, or if this was the real second level of the Tao Master's path, then the situation would be a little terrifying. Even he, who could sense the fifth major tribulation and had been divided into 4 tribulations in the Tao Master's path, was unable to sense the truth of the second level. Was there a secret hidden in the Tao Master's path that he could not even imagine? Although he hoped that this was the first situation, he was inclined to the second one, be it his reason or his intuition. After all, this was the Tao Master's path. With the strict rules here, would he be able to transcend the shackles of the level and sense the higher-level Tao Master's path just by opening up a world to replace the second level of the Tao Master's path? In this case, he naturally hoped that was the case. However, he still had this bit of self-awareness. Luo Fan stood there quietly and sighed in his heart. It seems that I will have to stay in the second level of the Tao Master's path for a longer time than I thought. There were countless thoughts in his mind. All kinds of thoughts kept emerging and being extinguished one after another. Suddenly, an idea emerged in his mind. What about the disciples of the true saint? Where are they? Under this light, the divine light in his eyes became incomparably serious. However, he suddenly realized that he seemed to have overlooked an extremely important situation. Since he stepped into the second level of the Tao Master's path, he had never seen or heard of any disciples of the Tao Master. Or in other words, there was no trace of the cultivators of the true saint's path. It was as if there were no cultivators of the true saint's path here. However, this situation was obviously impossible. Don't forget, even in the first level of the Tao Master's path, the disciples of the true saint had established incomparably large forces and absolutely suppressed the entire first level of the Tao Master's path. Even those forces of individual cultivators who had been suppressed by the forces established by these Tao Masters to the point where there was almost no room for survival were all frightening giants. Under such circumstances, would those disciples of the Tao Masters really be limited to the first level of the Tao Master's path? In this second level, would they really not exist? And if they existed, would they really be as unknown as they were now? Thinking of this, his eyes were already shining with an inexplicable cold light. There must be a large number of disciples of the Tao Masters who had stepped into the second level of the Tao Master's path. Moreover, they must have established a large force. He had not seen or heard of them at all. There was only one possibility. That was, they were not in his understanding of the Tao Master's path. In other words, according to his understanding, the second level of the Tao Master's path in front of him was probably only a small part of the second level of the Tao Master's path. He was afraid that it was only a small part of the second level of the Tao Master's path, or even a very insignificant part. Outside of this place, in other words, in the place where he felt the great pressure coming from his heart, there was a wider and more vast area. Those were the places where the Tao Master's disciples stayed. And there, the environment must be countless times more wonderful than here. The higher the level, the greater the gap. And in the end, even the worlds of others can't come into contact with each other. This sentence emerged in Luo Fan's mind. causing him to involuntarily hang an inexplicable sneer on his face. He had stepped into the Tao Master's path in order to pursue the advancement of the cultivation realm, to overcome the great tribulations, and finally to become a true saint. All the plans of the Tao Master's disciples here were meaningless to him. But this did not mean that he was willing to be deceived and was willing to be limited. I must break through the shackles and step into a wider area. He instantly made up his mind. With this determination, he temporarily stopped experiencing the worlds inside the eternal heaven and earth. Instead, he began to follow the senses of the eternal heaven and earth to sense the various things hidden behind the various strange scenes and to find a way to get in touch with them. When he first sensed it, there was an indescribable pressure coming from the various deeper hidden secret areas, which made him want to immediately cut off this feeling. But with Luo Fan's current state of mind, it was naturally impossible for him to be forced to cut off this feeling if he did not take the initiative to do so. He withstood this terrifying pressure, withstood the terrifying torture that constantly washed over his body and mind, as if his skin was being peeled off his bones. He carefully sensed everything, searching for all possibilities. After enduring this pressure for a long time, one would get used to it. One would treat it as natural. It was the same for the terrifying pressure coming from the mysterious area. As time passed, there were even cultivators who entered the eternal heaven and earth and began to explore the many worlds inside it, looking for the various hidden treasures. Only then did Luo Fan gradually get used to this kind of pressure, and gradually he grasped the traces of the mysterious area. The resonance between the mysterious area and the eternal heaven and earth was the best guide. Through this resonance, Luo Fan began to spread his own senses. Following this resonance, he should have been able to easily come into contact with the main body that resonated with the eternal heaven and earth. However, his senses did not spread far and already came into contact with an indescribable barrier. This barrier was faintly discernible, invisible, and intangible. Before coming into contact with it, even Luo Fan did not notice its existence. But the moment he came into contact with it, he felt an unimaginable repulsive force emerging from it. The moment his senses came into contact with the barrier, it was as if he had suffered an attack of the same level and instantly collapsed. Even his original body felt a burst of pain. Sure enough, it's imprisoned. At this time, Luo Fan was really convinced of his thoughts, and his expression became extremely ugly. From what he had seen, the cultivators who came back from the third level of the Tao Master's Road did not feel anything about this kind of imprisonment. Therefore, it could be imagined that when they were still on the second level, this place was already like this. After thinking about it again, perhaps the third, fourth, and even higher levels were in a similar situation. Thinking of this, even Luo Fan could not help but feel admiration for the existence that could do all this. One must know that the Tao Master's Road had existed countless powerful cultivators from ancient times to the present, and even in the distant future, stealing the sky and changing the sun under the eyes of so many cultivators, and imprisoning so many cultivators in an extremely small area without them knowing. This kind of method was shocking to think about.